Good evening and welcome, sweet listener. Please find your comfortable place once more. Let the day and its concerns drift away like ships leaving a harbour, growing smaller and smaller until they vanish over the horizon. There is nothing for you to do now but to listen, to let the story be the gentle tide that carries you. If you feel so inclined, you can leave a comment to let us know from where in the world you are joining us tonight. It is a quiet comfort to imagine this story finding a peaceful port in so many different corners of the globe. Now, let the lights dim, let your breathing slow. We are about to set sail on a different sea, into a different kind of silence. Our story does not take place on solid ground, but on the vast, unforgiving, and deeply mysterious expanse of the Northern Sea. It is a world of shifting grey horizons, of water the colour of slate, and of a silence that is not empty, but filled with the ceaseless, sighing murmur of the waves. It is a world where men live their lives on islands of creaking wood, their fates governed by the whims of the wind and the temper of the tide. Our vessel is a merchant brig named the Sea Serpent, a sturdy, practical ship, her timbers stained dark by salt and time, her sails patched and weathered like an old man's coat. She is not a vessel of grand adventure or royal purpose, but a workhorse, carrying barrels of salted fish, bolts of coarse wool, and casks of ale between the scattered rocky island ports that cling to the edges of the known world. Life aboard the Sea Serpent is a slow, methodical rhythm, a dance of duty and repetition. The days are marked not by clocks, but by the changing of the watch, the call for meals, and the slow, inexorable turning of the sun and stars. The crew are men much like the ship herself, sturdy, practical, and weathered by the sea. They are men of few words, their faces etched with the lines of 100 squalls, their hands as tough and calloused as old rope. Among them is a boy named Finn. He is not yet a man, barely 16 summers old, and the sea has not yet had time to fully scour the softness from his face. He is on his first long voyage, and he is quieter than the rest, his eyes holding a watchful, wondering quality that the older sailors lost long ago. He does not see the sea as an adversary to be fought or a road to be travelled, but as a living, breathing entity, a creature of immense and ancient moods. For 3 days, the Sea Serpent has been trapped, not in a storm, but in its quiet, ghostly cousin, a fog. A thick, wet, and sound-absorbing blanket of grey had descended upon them as they attempted to navigate the treacherous archipelago known as the Serpent's Jaw. It is a place of needle-like rocks that pierce the surface of the water like broken teeth, and of currents that run in wild, unpredictable eddies. Now, becalmed and blinded, they can do nothing but drift, waiting for the wind and the world to return. The fog changes everything. It shrinks the vastness of the ocean down to a small, circular room of shifting grey walls. The only sounds are the gentle lapping of the water against the hull, the rhythmic, mournful creak of the ship's timbers, and the occasional lonely cry of an unseen gull. The world beyond this small, damp circle has ceased to exist. The sun is a pale, diffuse memory, a slightly brighter patch in the oppressive grey overhead. The stars are a forgotten myth. It is in the deep, unnerving quiet of the third night of the fog that the stories begin. The men, with no sails to mend and no course to plot, gather in the faint, hazy glow of a single, well-shielded lantern. They speak in low voices, their words swallowed by the damp air. They speak, as sailors always do in such liminal moments, of the sea's ghosts. Finn sits just outside the circle of light, listening, his imagination painting vivid pictures in the swirling grey mist. They speak of mermaids whose songs are the sound of drowning, of krakens that sleep in the abyssal deep. But there is one tale they speak of with a different kind of reverence, a tale reserved for nights like this, when the world feels thin and the veil between the living and the dead seems to be made of nothing more than fog. They speak of the siren's lament. Master Kalen, the ship's ancient grizzled boatswain, is the one who tells the story best. His voice is a low, gravelly rumble, like stones being dragged by an undertow. She was not always a ghost, he begins, his eyes staring out into the impenetrable grey. She was once a real ship, the finest exploration vessel ever built. Her hull was of pale northern pine, so she seemed to glow on the water. Her sails were as white as fresh snow, and her captain was a man named Elias Thorne. According to Kaelin, Captain Thorne was not a common sailor. He was a genius, a master cartographer, a man of science and letters. His obsession was not with trade or conquest, but with knowledge. He believed that the world was a book, and he intended to be the one to read every single page. He believed that the sea, with its mysteries and its moods, was simply a puzzle to be solved, a thing to be measured, mapped, and ultimately tamed. His ship, the Siren's Lament, was his instrument. It was a floating laboratory filled not with cannons, but with astrolabes, sextants, and the most precise chronometers ever made. Its great cabin was a library of charts where Thorne and his hand-picked crew of scholars would work day and night, charting currents, measuring depths, and naming the unnamed reefs and islands of the world. He was arrogant, Kaelin explains, but it was the arrogance of a brilliant mind, a belief that reason and measurement could conquer all things, even the ancient, chaotic heart of the ocean. For years, he was successful. His name became a legend in the halls of geography and the courts of kings. His charts were masterpieces of accuracy and detail, but his success only fed his pride. He journeyed farther and farther into the frozen, uncharted waters of the far north, determined to create the one, final, perfect map. A map that would leave no mystery, no blank spaces, no room for the sea to keep any of its secrets. It was there, in the crushing ice and the disorienting, perpetual twilight of the northernmost sea, that his hubris finally overflowed. Caught in a sudden, violent storm that threatened to crush his perfect ship, his crew begged him to turn back, to seek shelter, to show the sea the respect it was due. But Captain Thorne, standing on the quarterdeck, the wind tearing at his clothes, simply laughed. He held up his charts, his instruments, and he shouted into the teeth of the gale. He boasted that he was the sea's master, that its petty rages were meaningless against his science. He declared that he would not just map the world, he would pin the sea to the paper, chain the tides with his numbers, and solve the last of its ancient riddles. He committed the ultimate sailor's sin. He showed the sea contempt. And the sea, Kaelin says, his voice dropping to a whisper, answered. The storm did not destroy the ship. The wind did not tear her sails. The waves did not crush her hull. The sea's punishment was far more subtle, more cruel, more absolute. The storm simply ceased. But the world that returned was not the one they had known. The curse was not one of endless storm, but of endless, agonizing error. When Captain Thorne looked to his charts, the coastlines he had so meticulously mapped were gone, replaced by new, unfamiliar shores. When he took a reading of the stars, the constellations themselves had shifted, forming new, unrecognizable patterns in the sky. The magnetic north his compass sought was no longer a fixed point, but a wandering, elusive ghost. The sea itself had answered his hubris by making itself, for him and his ship alone, fundamentally unmappable. It had become a place of infinite, fluid chaos. He was cursed to sail forever on an ocean that constantly remade itself before his eyes, his charts forever turning to lies in his hands, his science forever rendered meaningless. He, the man who wanted to know everything, was condemned to a state of eternal, absolute uncertainty. His crew, bound by their loyalty to his quest, were bound also to his curse. They were cursed to forever carry out their pointless duties. The navigator forever takes sightings of stars that are not there. The cartographers forever draw maps of coastlines that are illusions. And Captain Thorne, the brilliant master of measurement, stands eternally at his chart table, trying to plot a course on a sea that has no fixed points, a man driven mad by a puzzle with no solution. They say the Siren's Lament never harms another vessel. It is not a malevolent spirit. It is a ghost of profound and eternal sorrow. It appears only in the deepest fog, a silent, glowing ship moving without a wind, its crew of pale, spectral figures moving with a slow, soundless, and infinitely sad repetition of their useless tasks. To see her, Kaelin concludes, is not necessarily an omen of your own doom, but it is a terrible thing nonetheless. It is to look upon the face of madness, to witness a damnation so perfect, so tailored to the sinner, that it chills a man's soul far more than any tale of a kraken or a tempest. As the old boatswain finishes his story, a deep silence falls over the crew, heavier even than the fog. The men shift uneasily, making small, superstitious gestures. And it is in that moment that Finn, who is on watch at the ship's bow, sees it. At first, it is just a faint, milky luminescence in the fog ahead, a soft internal glow where there should be only impenetrable grey. He blinks, thinking it is a trick of the eye, a phantom created by the lantern light and the swirling mist. But the light grows steadier, brighter, and slowly it begins to take on a form, a ship. It is gliding toward them, emerging from the fog like a memory surfacing from the deep. It is pale, almost translucent, and seems to slide over the water rather than through it, leaving no wake. Her white sails are full and curved, though there is not a breath of wind to fill them, and she is utterly, profoundly silent. There is no creak of timber, no snap of canvas, no call of a watchman. On her decks, Finn can see figures moving. They are pale and indistinct, like smudges of smoke, and their movements are slow, graceful, and endlessly repetitive. He sees a man at the masthead, raising a spyglass to his eye, holding it there for a long moment, then lowering it, only to raise it again. He sees men at the railings, casting sounding lines whose ends never seem to splash into the water. And on the quarterdeck, silhouetted against the ship's own faint, cold light, he sees a tall, commanding figure bent over a large table, one hand tracing a line on a chart, the other gripping the ship's wheel. Captain Elias Thorne. The Sea Serpent's crew has seen it now, too. A collective, horrified gasp goes through them. Men cross themselves, whispering prayers, their faces pale in the lantern light. They are gripped by a primal, superstitious terror. But Finn feels something different. As the siren's lament glides past them, so close he feels a phantom chill on his skin. He feels not terror, but a wave of sorrow so immense, so profound, it almost brings him to his knees. He sees the eternal, pointless repetition of the crew's tasks. He sees the deep, obsessive, and utterly hopeless posture of the captain. He sees a ship not of doom, but of infinite, inescapable sadness. The ghostly vessel passes them and is slowly, silently swallowed by the fog once more. Her pale glow fades and the world returns to the simple, familiar grey. But the quiet is different now. It is filled with the weight of what they have witnessed. The legend is real. As the first, faint hint of a wind begins to stir, a sign that the fog might soon be lifting, Finn remains at the bow, staring into the spot where the ship vanished. The other sailors are already moving, relieved to have a task, eager to forget what they saw. But Finn cannot forget. He is left with the haunting image of the captain and a question that settles deep in his young, wondering soul. What must it feel like to be lost not just in the fog, but in a world that no longer makes sense? He feels an unexpected, inexplicable connection to the damned captain, a thread of empathy that has somehow stretched across the void from his world to theirs. And he knows, with a certainty that settles deep in his bones, that this will not be the last time he thinks of the siren's lament. The fog did not break all at once. It retreated slowly, reluctantly, as if the sea were loath to give up its secrets. It thinned from an impenetrable wall into a series of shifting, gauzy curtains, revealing tantalizing, momentary glimpses of a leaden sky and a choppy, grey sea. The wind, when it finally returned, was not a brisk, cleansing gale, but a series of cold, sighing breaths that did little more than stir the tattered edges of the mist. For the crew of the Sea Serpent, the return of the world was a profound relief. The sight of the horizon, however bleak and colourless, was a comfort. The feel of the wind on their faces, the sound of the sails beginning to luff and snap, the renewed familiar motion of the ship as it began to move through the water once more. These were the things that chased away the ghostly chill of the night. The men moved about their duties with a renewed, almost frantic energy. They hauled on ropes, trimmed the sails, and shouted commands, their voices deliberately loud, filling the air with the mundane, reassuring sounds of work, a bulwark against the unnatural silence they had witnessed. No one spoke of what they had seen. It was an unspoken, collective agreement. The appearance of the siren's lament was a thing to be locked away, a private, shared terror to be buried deep beneath the routines of the day. To speak of it would be to give it more power, to invite its sorrowful magic to linger in their own world. They worked. They ate their midday meal of hardtack and salted beef, and they kept their eyes fixed on the tangible realities of their ship. The scuffed wood of the deck, the rough texture of the hemp ropes, the familiar, comforting shapes of the barrels lashed to the railings. But Finn could not forget. He went about his duties as a ship's boy, swabbing the decks, coiling ropes, fetching tools for the carpenter. But his mind was elsewhere. He was adrift in the wake of the ghost ship. While the other men looked outward, relieved to see the world again, Finn found himself looking inward, haunted by the profound melancholy of the vision. The other sailors had seen a terrifying omen, a spectre of doom. Finn had seen a tragedy. He had seen a crew of men trapped not in death, but in a state far worse, a state of eternal, meaningless purpose. He found himself replaying the scene over and over in his mind's eye. The slow, graceful, and utterly pointless movements of the spectral crew, the navigator raising his sextant to a sky with no real stars, the cartographers hunched over their tables drawing maps of a world that was a lie, and most of all, the captain, the tall, commanding figure of Elias Thorne, a man of genius condemned to an eternity of wrestling with a problem that had no solution. Finn felt a strange kinship with him, an empathy that he could not explain. He too was a searcher, a boy who looked at the sea and saw not a surface but a depth filled with unanswered questions. In Thorne's damnation, he saw a horrifying, twisted reflection of his own innate curiosity. The wind finally freshened as the day wore on, and the last of the fog was scoured from the sky. Under the command of their captain, a grim, pragmatic man named Alistair, they picked their way carefully through the last of the serpent's jaw, the needle-like rocks now clearly visible, glistening wetly in the pale afternoon light. By dusk, they were in open, safer waters, sailing a steady course toward their destination, the port of Whitefall. That evening, as Finn sat alone near the stern, watching the ship's wake churn the dark water into a pale, phosphorescent trail, Master Kalen, the old boatswain, came and sat beside him. The old man was carving a piece of driftwood with a small, sharp knife, his gnarled hands moving with a slow, practiced ease. For a long time, they sat in a comfortable silence, the only sounds the creak of the ship and the rush of water. "It sits heavily on you, boy," Kalen said at last, his voice a low rumble, his eyes not on Finn but on the horizon. "The ship," Finn started, surprised that the old man had broken the unspoken rule. I don't understand it," he admitted, his own voice quiet. "The others, they are afraid. I am not afraid. I am sad." Kalen nodded slowly, carefully shaving a sliver of wood from his carving. "Fear is the first door. Most men never open it to see what lies beyond. Sadness, that is the second door. It takes a different kind of heart to open that one." He paused, inspecting his work. He was carving a small, stylized seabird. Captain Thorne was not an evil man. That is the tragedy of it. He did not seek gold or power. He sought knowledge, a noble pursuit, but he did not temper his ambition with humility. He saw the sea as a machine to be dismantled and understood, not as a spirit to be respected. He tried to capture its soul on paper, and in return, the sea captured his. "Is the story true?" Finn asked. "All of it?" "A story is like a ship's rope, boy," Kalen said, his voice taking on a distant, philosophical tone. "It is woven from many strands. Some strands are truth, things that truly happened. Some are speculation, things that might have been, and some are spun from the fears and hopes of the men who tell it. But once the rope is woven, it is strong, it does its job. It does not matter which strand is which, the story is true enough." He finished his carving, the small wooden bird now smooth and perfect in his palm. He held it out to Finn. "Here, for you, a land bird, to remind you that not all creatures belong to the sea." Finn took the small, warm bird, its wooden form a comfort in his hand. "Thank you, Master Kalen. Do not let the ghost ship anchor in your own heart, boy," the old man said, his voice now gentle. "Pity the damned, but do not join them in their sorrow. You are of the living. Your journey is still being written. His is finished and will be reenacted for all time." With that, the old boatswain rose, his joints cracking, and ambled off to check the rigging, leaving Finn alone with his thoughts and the small wooden bird. 2 days later, the sea serpent arrived at the port of Whitefall. The town was nestled in a deep, protected cove, its small stone houses clinging to the steep green hills that rose up from the water's edge. A fine, persistent drizzle was falling, making the slate roofs of the houses glisten. The air was filled with the smell of damp earth, wood smoke, and the distant, reassuring scent of baking bread. After weeks at sea, the smell of land was a powerful, grounding thing. As the ship was being moored at the busy wooden docks, Finn saw a figure standing apart from the usual crowd of merchants and dock workers. It was a young woman, her face pale and framed by dark, wet hair. She was staring out at their ship with an expression of intense, desperate hope. As the gangplank was lowered, she moved forward, her eyes scanning the faces of the crew as they began to disembark. She was looking for someone. Her gaze passed over Finn, and he saw the hope in her eyes flicker and die, replaced by a deep, weary disappointment. She turned and walked away, disappearing into the narrow, winding streets of the town. Later that day, while running an errand for the ship's cook, Finn saw her again. She was sitting on a stone bench in the small town square, staring into the water of a rain-filled fountain. He felt a strange pull, a sense of connection he could not explain. He hesitated for a moment, then, clutching the small wooden bird in his pocket for courage, he approached her. "Excuse me, miss," he said, his voice shy. "I saw you at the docks. You were looking for someone." The young woman looked up, her eyes the color of a stormy sea, startled. "I was," she said, her voice soft and imbued with a permanent sadness. "I am always looking, every time a ship makes port." "Who do you wait for?" Finn asked gently. "My father," she replied. "His name is Thomas. He was a cartographer, a map maker. He was the best in all the Northern Isles." A flicker of pride shone through her sadness. "He was recruited years ago for a great expedition, a scientific voyage to chart the unknown seas. He sailed on a beautiful ship with white sails, a ship called the Siren's Lament." Finn felt a cold dread wash over him, a feeling like stepping into a patch of icy water. The wooden bird in his pocket suddenly felt very heavy. The ghost ship was not just a story, it was real. Its crew were not just phantoms, they had been real men, men with homes and with daughters who still waited for them on the shore. The young woman, whose name was Alara, seemed to find some comfort in speaking of her father to this quiet, empathetic boy. She told Finn of her father's passion for his work, of his excitement for the voyage, of his belief that he was helping to create the greatest map the world had ever known. She spoke of the captain, Elias Thorne, a brilliant but intense man who had personally come to their small cottage to recruit her father. "The first year we received letters," Alara said, her gaze once again distant. "Letters filled with wonder, describing new lands, new stars. My father's letters were filled with beautiful, detailed drawings of coastlines and sea creatures. Then, the letters stopped. She had waited. For 10 years, she had waited, her hope slowly eroding like a cliff face battered by the sea. Everyone else had given them up for lost, another ship claimed by the treacherous northern ice. But she could not. She still came to the docks every time a sail was sighted, her heart clinging to a single, desperate and impossible sliver of hope. Finn did not know what to say. How could he tell her that he had seen her father's ship? How could he describe the terrible, eternal fate that had befallen the crew? To tell her the truth would be to extinguish that last, precious sliver of hope, to replace it with a horror far worse than a simple death at sea. And so, he said nothing of what he had seen. He simply sat with her on the cold stone bench in the drizzling rain and listened. He listened as she spoke of her father, of his kindness, of his passion, of the way he could make a simple coastline on a piece of paper look like the most beautiful art in the world. As he listened, Finn's own private, haunting vision of the ghost ship began to change. It was no longer just a profound, philosophical tragedy. It was now a deeply personal one. The spectral, repetitive figures on the deck were no longer just symbols of a terrible fate. They had names. They had families. One of them was named Thomas, and he had a daughter named Alara, who had spent a decade of her life waiting for him on a rain-swept shore. The sorrow of the ghost ship was no longer a distant, ethereal thing. It had come ashore, and it had found a home in Finn's own heart. The drizzle of the afternoon, which had seemed so determined to wash the world clean, had instead given way to a deep, enveloping, and profoundly quiet coastal night. The last of the merchants, their deals concluded, and the last of the weary dockhands, their cargoes secured, had retreated into the warm, hazy, amber-lit interiors of the town's 2 taverns. From the deck of the Sea Serpent, their occasional bursts of laughter were a faint, muffled, and distant sound, a foreign language from a different world, one that was quickly and effortlessly swallowed by the vast, damp quiet of the harbour. The port of Whitefall settled into a deep and ancient slumber. Its small stone houses, which clung to the steep green hills like barnacles, grew dark one by one, their slate roofs gleaming with a slick, reptilian sheen under the faint, intermittent light of a heavily shrouded moon. The only true, constant presence was the sea itself. It was a sound that was also a feeling, a soft, rhythmic, and insistent shushing against the thick, weed-covered pilings of the dock, a ceaseless, ancient, and deeply melancholic lullaby sung to a sleeping town. Finn did not sleep. He could not. He had returned to the Sea Serpent hours ago, the quiet, heartbreaking conversation with Alara having left a profound and indelible mark upon his soul, like a brand on new leather. He lay in his cramped, swaying hammock, suspended in the darkness of the forecastle, surrounded by the soft snores and murmurs of the sleeping crew, the familiar, living sounds of his own ship, the low, resonant groans of the hull as it shifted with the tide, the gentle, rhythmic creaks of the mast, the scent of tarred rope and damp wool, were usually a comfort. Tonight, they were a stark, almost violent contrast to the profound, unnatural, and eternal silence of the vessel that now occupied his every thought. The ghost ship was no longer a story, a chilling legend to be whispered on foggy nights. It had a face now. It had a name. Thomas. A man who drew beautiful, intricate maps of the world. A man who had a daughter with eyes the color of a stormy sea. A daughter who had spent a decade of her youth slowly turning to stone on a windswept shore. The weight of this new knowledge was not a thought. It was a physical thing. It pressed down on him in the darkness, a cold, heavy anchor settling in the pit of his stomach, making the small, enclosed space of his hammock feel like a coffin. He could not bear the stillness, the feeling of being trapped in the dark with the ghost of another man's grief. He slipped from his hammock, his movements as silent as a cat's, and made his way through the maze of sleeping sailors and onto the deserted deck. The air that greeted him was cold and heavy, thick with the primeval, organic smells of the sea at low tide. It was the scent of wet stone, of salt, of exposed, decaying seaweed, and of the deep, dark, peaty earth of the nearby hills. A thick, wet mist was rolling in from the mouth of the harbour, not a blinding, uniform fog like the one that had trapped them before, but a series of slow, spectral, and predatory tendrils, writhing and coiling around the masts and rigging of the docked ships, as if the sea itself were extending its ghostly fingers to reclaim the land. The moon was a pale, sickly, and distant smudge behind the shifting, vaporous clouds, its weak, ethereal light casting a faint, silvery, and unsettling glow on the slick, dark, and glassy water of the harbour. Finn walked to the stern of the Sea Serpent, his bare feet silent on the damp, cold planks. He looked out past the relative safety of the harbour's embrace, toward the open sea, toward the place where the world dissolved into an indistinguishable union of grey and black. He reached into his pocket and clutched the small wooden bird that Master Kalen had given him. Its smooth, solid, and earthly form was a meagre anchor in the vast, unsettling, and increasingly unreal sea of his thoughts. His mind, unbidden and with a terrible, vivid clarity, began to paint a picture on the vast, dark canvas of the misty night. He imagined the siren's lament out there in the lonely, unwitnessed darkness. He saw her pale, glowing hull, carved from some mythical, spectral pine, gliding through the black water. She was not a ship, but a thought made manifest, a phantom vessel on a phantom ocean. He saw her white sails, impossibly, unnaturally full, catching a wind that no living sailor could feel, a wind that blew only in the desolate landscape of her eternal damnation. He saw the cold, pale, phosphorescent light, the color of drowned things that clung to her rigging and her mastheads like frozen, silent St. Elmo's fire. He pictured the crew, the pale, silent figures moving with their slow, soundless, graceful, and infinitely sad repetition. He saw them swabbing decks that were never dirty, yet were perpetually damp with a fine, spectral sea spray that never dried. He saw them coiling ropes that were never used, their hands moving with a practiced, ghostly efficiency, the ropes themselves seeming to glow with a faint, cold light. He saw them polishing brass fittings that never tarnished, their movements a perfect, hollow pantomime of diligence. He saw the lookout, a lonely figure lashed to the masthead, forever raising a long, elegant spyglass to his eye, his gaze forever fixed on a horizon that was always, eternally, shrouded in a fog that would never lift, searching for a land he could never find. And then, with a clarity that made his heart ache, he saw him. Thomas, the cartographer, Ilara's father. He pictured the man, hunched over his great polished chart table in the ship's library, a single, cold, ghostly lantern, its flame never flickering, illuminating his tireless work. He saw his hand, a pale, elegant, and translucent thing moving with an unerring, artistic grace. He saw his quill cut from the feather of some ghostly Arctic bird, scratching silently, without a sound, on a piece of pristine spectral parchment. He was meticulously, beautifully, and perfectly mapping a coastline that did not exist, a phantom shoreline of impossible cliffs and treacherous imaginary reefs, a coastline that vanished from the sea the very moment his pen touched the paper. It was a masterpiece of a lie, a work of art that dissolved even as it was being created. A profound, aching sorrow washed over Finn, a sorrow so deep, so absolute, it was almost a physical pain, a crushing weight on his own young chest. He finally, truly, understood the exquisite, intellectual cruelty of the curse. It was not a grand, dramatic punishment of fire or storm, of shrieking winds or ship-shattering waves. It was a subtle, silent, and deeply psychological torture, a damnation perfectly, exquisitely, and poetically tailored to the ambitions of the men it had claimed. They were not condemned to suffer pain. They were condemned to strive, endlessly, meticulously, and without any hope of success. Their own passions, their own unique talents, their own singular genius had been twisted into the very instruments of their eternal torment. The navigator was condemned to navigate a sea whose stars were a lie. The lookout was condemned to look for a land that did not exist. And the cartographer, the artist of the real world, was condemned to map an illusion, his life's great passion having become his life's eternal, meaningless, and solitary work. As Finn stood there, lost in this bleak, chilling reverie, the world around him seemed to change. The already quiet harbour grew quieter still. The distant, muffled sounds from the town, which had been the last, faint link to the world of living men, faded away completely. The gentle, rhythmic lapping of the water against the hull of the sea serpent seemed to cease. A deep, unnatural, and profoundly unnerving silence descended upon the world, the same pregnant, waiting silence he had felt in the heart of the fog. His heart began to pound, a frantic, panicked drum against the sudden absolute stillness. He knew this silence. He had felt it before. It was the silence that preceded the unreal. He looked out toward the mouth of the harbour, his eyes straining, his pupils wide in the gloom, searching the swirling, coiling grey mist. And then he saw it. It was not the ship itself, not this time. It was something smaller, more intimate, and in its own way, even more heartbreaking. It was a single, flickering, and impossibly lonely point of light, far out on the dark water, where no light should be. It was a small, unsteady, yellow flame, like a candle in a bottle, bobbing gently and aimlessly on the black waves. It was a sight so impossible, so contrary to the known laws of the sea and of fire, that it made the breath catch in his throat and turn to ice. The light seemed to be moving, not with the steady, purposeful drift of a current, but with a slow, wandering, and deeply sorrowful aimlessness. It floated on the dark water, a single, tiny, fragile spark of warmth in an immense, cold, and indifferent universe. The legends, the tales whispered by old, weary sailors on the darkest, stormiest nights, spoke of this too. They said that sometimes, perhaps once a decade, perhaps once a century, the damned souls of the ghost ship would be overcome by a wave of memory, a desperate, crushing need to connect with the world they had lost. They would write letters, these legends claimed, letters filled with their mad, looping thoughts, their fragmented memories, their eternal, unanswered questions. They would seal these letters in thick glass bottles, attach a single spectral candle that would burn forever but give off no heat, and cast them upon the sea. They were letters from men who no longer truly existed, addressed to wives and children who had long since grown old or passed into dust, cast upon an ocean that no longer obeyed the laws of geography. They were prayers that could never be answered, messages of love that could never be delivered. Finn watched, utterly mesmerized, his body frozen as the tiny light drifted on the black water. He felt an overwhelming, irrational, and powerful urge to call out to it, to untie the ship's dinghy and row out into the mist and the darkness to retrieve it, to hold the cool, smooth glass of the bottle in his hands and read the words of the lost soul who had sent it. He thought of Ilara, of her sad, waiting eyes, and for a wild, breathtaking and heartbreaking moment, he allowed himself to imagine that the bottle contained a letter from her father. He pictured a final, beautiful and intricate drawing of a phantom coastline, and beneath it, a last, loving and desperate message to a daughter he could no longer find, a daughter whose face he could probably no longer clearly remember. The light flickered as if in a sudden, unfelt breeze. It dimmed, then flared brightly one last time, a final defiant pulse of light against the encroaching darkness. Then, as a particularly thick, wet tendril of mist coiled around it like a shroud, it was gone. The sea was dark and empty once more. The profound, unnatural silence was broken by the returning, familiar, and now almost deafening sound of the waves lapping against the shore. The moment was over. The veil had been drawn closed again. Finn stood at the stern of the sea serpent for a long time after, a very long time, his hand clutching the small wooden bird in his pocket so tightly his knuckles were white and aching. The world around him, the solid, tar-scented deck of his ship, the sleeping, solid stone of the town of Whitefall, the steady, predictable rhythm of the tide, all of it now felt fragile, temporary, and profoundly unreal. He felt as though he had been given a glimpse behind the world's mundane curtain, a look into a different, colder, and far lonelier reality that existed just alongside his own, a reality of endless, pointless wandering, of meticulous, meaningless labor, and of a sorrow so deep and so absolute it had stained the very fabric of the sea itself. He finally turned, a deep, shuddering sigh escaping his lips, and made his way back to the forecastle, back to his hammock. The cold of the night air had seeped deep into his bones, a chill that he knew no blanket or fire would ever truly be able to warm. He knew with a certainty that settled in him not like a thought, but like a stone, like a lodestone in his very soul, that he could not stay on this ship. He could not return to a life of simply hauling fish and wool from one port to another. His own journey, which had once been a simple, straightforward voyage of a boy learning a trade, had been irrevocably, profoundly, and terrifyingly altered. The ghost ship had thrown its long, spectral shadow over his life, and he could no longer be content with simply sailing on the surface of the world, pretending not to know what lay in its misty, sorrowful depths. He felt a new, strange, and deeply unsettling purpose beginning to form in his heart. It was a purpose he did not yet understand, a course he could not yet chart on any known map. But he knew, with a certainty that was as cold and as clear as the northern stars, that it was a course that would inevitably, one day, lead him away from the safe, familiar harbors of the living and back into the fog, back into the silence, back toward the pale, glowing sails and the eternal, heartbreaking sorrow of the siren's lament. He was no longer just a sailor. He was now, and for the rest of his life, a searcher, an acolyte of a great and terrible mystery. The ship moves. It is the one, eternal, and undeniable truth of its existence. It is the alpha and omega of its universe, the beginning and the end of its own story, told over and over again in a language of silent motion. It moves through a sea that is not a true sea, under a sky that is not a true sky. This is not a vessel traversing a physical space between 2 points. It is a self-contained, mobile, and everlasting moment of damnation, a bubble of exquisitely tailored reality, adrift in the great, unfeeling void. Its name, the Siren's Lament, is a whisper on the lips of living sailors, a chilling chord in the mournful song of maritime folklore, a name synonymous with dread and ill omen. But to those who sail upon her, the name is a forgotten word from a forgotten language. There is no before and no after. There is no past to regret and no future to hope for. There is only the ship and the fog and the task. The fog is their ocean and their sky, their firmament and their abyss. It is a perpetual, shifting, and utterly featureless landscape of pearlescent grey. Sometimes it is thin, a gauzy, ethereal mist that clings to the rigging like the spectral cobwebs of some colossal, celestial spider. In these moments, the ship seems to swim through a sea of diluted milk, its own form hazy and indistinct. At other times, the fog is a thick, wet, and suffocating blanket, a physical presence that presses in on the ship from all sides, shrinking its already isolated world down to the finite, glowing length of its own pale deck. During these times, to stand at the stern is to believe the bow no longer exists. The world becomes a small, damp, and claustrophobic room, walled in by an impenetrable, shifting nothingness. There is no sun here. There is no warm, benevolent star to mark the passage of day or to warm the skin. There is only a diffuse, sourceless, and deeply melancholic luminescence, a slightly brighter patch in the oppressive grey overhead that gives the cold, clinical illusion of day. There is no moon, no scattering of familiar, friendly stars to guide the navigator's eye. There is only a cold, internal and phosphorescent glow that emanates from the ship itself. It is a light that seems to rise from within the very timbers of the hull, from the threads of the sails, from the pale, translucent flesh of the crew. It is the light of souls, a cold, unwavering radiance that casts long, indistinct, and utterly motionless shadows upon the deck. The ship itself is a masterpiece of divine, malevolent contradiction. Her hull, carved from the phantom memory of pale, resilient northern pine, is flawless. It never weathers, never splinters, never succumbs to the rot and wear that plagues all living wood. It is as smooth and pale as polished bone. Her sails, as white as the memory of fresh snow, are always perfectly, impossibly full, their proud, curved bellies catching a wind that does not exist, a wind that makes no sound, has no temperature, and leaves no ripple on the glassy, grey surface of the water. The intricate web of her rigging, a complex system of ropes and pulleys, is perpetually taut, humming with a silent, unseen tension, yet the ropes never fray, never stretch, never slacken. The brass fittings, the binnacle housing the mad compass, the sextants locked in their velvet-lined boxes, the railings that circle the deck, gleam with a soft, polished, and eternal luster, though no human hand has truly polished them in a century. The ship is in a state of perfect, unchanging, and sterile preservation. It is a museum piece adrift in the endless sea of eternity, a perfect instrument for a task that can never be completed. And then there is the crew. They are figures of pale, indistinct light, their forms not quite solid, their edges blurred and softened by the eternal damp mist, as if they are watercolors left out in the rain. They move with a slow, graceful, and deeply hypnotic repetition, each man locked in the perfect, endless, and intricate loop of the task he was performing at the very moment the curse fell. They are not ghosts in the traditional sense. They are not spirits bound by anger or a desire for revenge or an unfulfilled longing. Such emotions are luxuries they can no longer afford. They are echoes. They are living recordings etched onto the very fabric of time by a will far greater than their own, forced to play out their final, futile acts of diligence for all of eternity. Their existence is a quiet, profound, and unending testament to their captain's fatal pride. On the forecastle, a young sailor named Marcus stands his endless watch. His youthful face, which in life was prone to easy smiles, is now a smooth, unlined mask of intense, focused concentration. He raises a long, elegant, and spectral spyglass to his eye, his movements fluid and practiced, a ballet of duty he has performed more times than there are stars in the living sky. He scans the impenetrable grey horizon, his head turning in a slow, deliberate arc. He is looking for a landmark, a coastline, a break in the fog that will never come. The lens of his spyglass is a cold, phantom thing. It does not magnify the grey nothingness, but simply frames it. He holds the pose for precisely 3 minutes, the duration of a single, slow exhalation of the sea. Then he lowers the spyglass, his face a blank, passive mask of disappointment. He blinks once, slowly, a single, rhythmic and automatic gesture. And then, his eternal duty calling once more, he raises the spyglass to his eye to begin the search again. He has done this 1 billion times. He will do it 1 billion more. His damnation is not blindness. It is the act of looking forever at nothing. Along the ship's rail, 2 other sailors, John and Eric, endlessly perform the ritual of casting their sounding lines. In life, they were the best, able to read the secrets of the ocean floor with a sensitivity that was almost supernatural. Now, that skill is their torment. The lead weights at the end of their ropes are spectral, heavy with a memory of mass but possessing no true weight, and they pass through the surface of the phantom water without a splash, without a sound, without so much as a ripple. They sink into the grey, depthless and featureless abyss, their lines spooling out endlessly, for the sea beneath this ship is as bottomless as their collective despair. They watch the depth markers on the rope, small, coloured knots that their own hands tied in another life, pass through their fingers. Their lips move silently, noting a measurement that is always the same, always infinite, before beginning the slow, steady, and utterly useless process of hauling the line back in, their muscles moving with a memory of a strain that they no longer feel. Their damnation is not to be lost. It is to be eternally measuring a depth that cannot be measured. In the ship's galley, a space that should be a place of warmth and comfort and savoury smells, the cook, a stout man named Ben, stands before a cold, dark, and eternally silent stove. He goes through the precise, well-remembered motions of preparing a meal for a crew of 30 men. He chops phantom vegetables with a knife that makes no sound on the solid oak cutting board. The ghostly shapes of carrots and onions fall away, only to vanish before they can accumulate. He stirs a great, empty copper pot with a wooden spoon, his arm moving in a steady, circular motion, a rhythm that once produced hearty, life-sustaining stews. The air carries no scent of food, no hint of spice, no warmth from the stove. It is a perfect, hollow pantomime of nourishment, a ritual of sustenance for men who will never feel hunger again, who will never again know the simple, profound pleasure of a hot meal on a cold night. His damnation is the eternal act of cooking for a hunger that has long since died. And so it is, all over the ship, in every corner, on every deck. The curse has overlooked no one. The carpenter, a man who loved the scent of fresh sawed pine, endlessly sands a plank of wood that is already as smooth as polished glass, his motions creating a fine, spectral dust that vanishes before it can settle. The surgeon, a man of science and healing, lays out his gleaming, spectral instruments on a clean white cloth, his silver probes and scalpels arranged in a perfect, orderly row, eternally preparing for an injury that will never occur, for a sickness that will never come, on a crew whose bodies can no longer be wounded or broken. The sailors in the rigging, young men who once moved with the swift, daring grace of acrobats, now climb the spectral ratlines with an unerring, dreamlike precision. Their hands and feet find their holds without thought, their bodies moving through a familiar, remembered dance. They check knots that will never fray. They secure sails that will never falter in the non-existent wind. They gaze out from their high perches at a world that is only grey. They are eternally vigilant, eternally ready in a world where nothing ever happens. They are perfect sailors on a perfect ship, sailing a perfect sea of nothingness. The true heart of these ships' unique and terrible damnation, however, is not to be found on the windswept decks or in the silent, functional spaces below. It resides in the great cabin, a large, elegantly appointed room at the stern of the ship, which serves as its library, its laboratory, and its chart room. In life, this cabin was the epicenter of the expedition, a vibrant, buzzing hub of intellectual discovery, filled with the excited chatter of brilliant minds, the scratch of quills on parchment, and the scent of books, ink, and hot tea. Now it is the epicenter of the curse, a silent, sterile, and profoundly sorrowful cathedral dedicated to the worship of failed reason. Here, two of the expedition's cartographers are at their eternal work. One is a man named Thomas, a man whose love for the beauty of a well-drawn line was surpassed only by the love for the daughter he left behind on a distant, now mythical, shore. He is bent over a great, polished chart table, a single, cold, ghostly lantern hanging above him, its unwavering light illuminating his tireless work. His hand, a pale, elegant and translucent thing, moves with an unerring, artistic grace that is heartbreaking to witness. His quill, cut from the feather of some ghostly, arctic bird, scratches silently, without a sound, on a piece of pristine, spectral parchment that never runs out. He is meticulously, beautifully, and perfectly mapping a coastline that does not exist. He draws phantom fjords of impossible depth, needle-like sea stacks that pierce the misty air, and gentle, sandy coves that seem to invite a ship to anchor. It is a work of breathtaking artistry and absolute accuracy, a perfect representation of an utter and complete lie. For the coastline he draws is the coastline of the sea as it appears to him in that very moment. And the sea's curse is that it shifts and changes its form constantly. The very act of his drawing it, of attempting to fix it to the page, is what causes it to dissolve. His art is its own undoing. He is an artist creating masterpieces that vanish even as they are being created. And finally, at the heart of it all, the center of this small, damned universe, is the captain, Elias Thorne. He stands on the quarterdeck, his back to the non-existent wind, his tall, commanding figure a study in eternal, obsessive, and agonized concentration. He does not age. His handsome, intelligent face is forever fixed in the prime of his brilliant, arrogant life. His dark hair is unsalted by grey, his posture is unbent by the weight of a century. But his eyes are ancient. They hold the vast, weary, and maddening emptiness of 100 years of absolute, unrelenting uncertainty. They are the eyes of a man who has stared too long into the abyss, only to find the abyss is a flawless, shifting mirror of his own failed intellect. His world has shrunk to a small, sacred, and torturous space, the ship's great wheel, which he grips with hands that no longer feel the pull of the rudder, the gleaming brass binnacle that houses the eternally frantically spinning compass, and the great chart table before him. The table is covered with his masterpiece, his life's work, the Great Northern Chart. But it is no longer a work of genius. It is a canvas of pure, malicious chaos. The coastlines he so meticulously surveyed now shift and writhe before his very eyes, the ink seeming to crawl and rearrange itself like living tendrils. Islands appear and disappear in the blink of an eye. The compass rose, the very foundation of his science, the symbol of order and reason, spins aimlessly, its needle a frantic, trembling blur, unable to find a home, unable to offer a single, reliable point of reference. He is locked in an endless, silent, intellectual battle with a foe that does not obey the rules of physics, of logic, of reality itself. He will raise a sextant to his eye, his movements as precise and sure as they were on the day he was cursed, and he will take a reading of the stars. But the stars above are a shifting, fluid, and mocking lie, a handful of scattered diamonds thrown across a grey velvet that rearranges itself with his every glance. The numbers he reads are phantoms, ghosts of a forgotten trigonometry. He will consult his chronometer, a magnificent instrument of brass and glass, a testament to the human desire to master time. But time itself on this vessel has no meaning. It does not pass, it only is. The hands of the chronometer spin wildly, a blur of gold, measuring an eternity in every second and a second in every eternity. His brow is perpetually furrowed in a state of intense, agonizing calculation. He is a man of reason trapped in a world that is the living embodiment of unreason. He is a solver of puzzles, a master of logic, condemned to an eternity of wrestling with a puzzle that has no solution, a puzzle whose pieces change their shape every time he tries to fit them together. This is his hell. Not fire, not ice, not the gnashing of teeth. It is the eternal, maddening, and inescapable failure of his own brilliant mind. It is the perfect, poetic damnation for a man who believed his intellect could conquer the soul of the world. Sometimes, perhaps once a decade, perhaps once a century, for who on this ship could measure such a thing? A crack appears in the smooth, featureless wall of eternity. A flicker of the old world, the real world, breaks through the placid, grey surface of their damnation. It is a mystery what causes it. Perhaps it is a trick of the phantom light, a momentary arrangement of the mist that looks, for a heartbreaking instant, like a familiar headland. Perhaps it is a scent that isn't there, a ghost of wood smoke or baking bread carried on a wind that doesn't blow. Or perhaps it is simply the soul itself, a thing so resilient that even after a century of suppression, it must occasionally cry out. In these moments, a wave of memory, a tsunami of profound and painful remembrance will wash over one of the damned crewmen. The eternal, numbing present will shatter, and for a few agonizing seconds, he will remember. The lookout, Marcus, will suddenly, vividly remember the feel of the sun on his face, the taste of salt on his lips, the sound of his mother's laughter. The cartographer, Thomas, will be struck by an image of his daughter, Ilara, so clear and so real that he can almost feel the weight of her as a small child in his arms. The sailor, John, will remember the fierce, warm pride he felt when he bought his first small fishing boat. The memory is an agony. It is a reminder of all that has been lost, a brief, blinding flash of light in a world of eternal grey. And in the throes of this agony, he will be compelled to act. He will be seized by a desperate, overwhelming, and irrational need to connect with the world he has lost. He will find a bottle, a thick, green glass thing that appears in his hand as if from a dream. He will find a piece of parchment, a blank page from a ship's log that has not been updated in 100 years. And he will write. His hand, which moments before was a phantom of light, will feel strangely solid. The quill will feel real. He will write a letter home, a desperate, rambling, and incoherent plea for forgiveness, a fragmented memory of a shared joke, a map of a coastline that he suddenly, desperately needs to believe is real. It is a hopeless, beautiful, and profoundly human act of rebellion against the crushing, inhuman logic of his curse. When the letter is finished, he will seal the bottle with a cork that materializes from the mist. And then, from the deepest well of his own reactivated sorrow, a single, spectral candle will appear, its flame born of his own yearning, sorrowful light. It is a flame that will burn forever but give off no heat. He will attach this candle to the bottle and, with a final, desperate prayer to a god he has long since forgotten, he will cast it into the grey, indifferent, and featureless sea. Let us focus now on one such moment. Let us witness the breaking of the pattern, the brief, agonizing flicker of humanity that serves only to deepen the darkness that follows. The subject of this momentary grace, or perhaps this refined torture, is Eric, one of the two sailors tasked with the eternal sounding of the bottomless sea. For a length of time that has no name, a day, a year, a decade, Eric's existence has been a simple, three-part rhythm. The release of the line, the noting of the infinite depth, the slow, steady retrieval. His hands, pale and luminous, move with an economy and grace that is hypnotic. The rope, a spectral, glowing cord, slips through his fingers, its phantom texture a ghost against his skin. He does not think. He does not feel. He is a perfect, silent machine for the performance of a single, useless task. But then, it happens. A shift in the non-existent air, a change in the quality of the sourceless light. He is in the middle of hauling in the line, his arms moving in their steady, practiced rhythm. He looks down at his hands as they coil the glowing rope onto the deck, and for the first time in a century, he truly sees them. He sees not the pale, translucent appendages of a damned soul, but the hands of a young man. He sees the calluses on his palms, hard-won from years of honest labor. He sees the small, jagged scar on his left thumb, a memory of a mishap with a fishing hook when he was just a boy. He sees the faint, dark stain of tar beneath his fingernails. And with the sight of his own hands, the world of memory comes flooding back in a devastating, unstoppable torrent. He is no longer on the silent, grey deck of the Siren's Lament. He is standing on the stone quay of his home village, a place of sharp, real sensations. He can smell the tar from the fishing nets laid out to dry, the pungent, oily scent of the gulls, the clean, cold smell of the north wind. He can feel the solid, uneven stone beneath his worn leather boots. He can hear the cacophony of life. The cries of the fishwives, the hammering from the cooper's shop, the laughter of his younger brother, Lars. The memory of his brother's face is so sharp, so clear, it is a physical blow. He sees his unruly blonde hair, his bright, mischievous eyes, the gap in his teeth where he was kicked by a pony. He remembers the promise he made to Lars before he left on this grand expedition. He had promised to bring him back a piece of ivory from a narwhal, a mermaid's purse from the deep ocean, a map of the edge of the world. He had promised to return a hero, a man of wealth and stories. The grief that accompanies this memory is not the dull, passive sorrow of the curse. It is a sharp, active and agonizing pain. It is the grief of a broken promise. It is the raw, terrible grief of loss. A sound escapes his throat, the first sound he has made in 100 years. It is a dry, ragged, choking sob. The other crew members do not turn. They do not notice. They are locked in their own eternal loops. He is utterly, completely alone in his moment of resurrected pain. The need to communicate, to bridge the impossible chasm of time and reality, becomes an overwhelming physical imperative. He stumbles away from the railing, leaving the half-coiled, glowing rope to lie on the deck like a sleeping serpent. He looks around wildly, his ancient, sorrow-filled eyes now seeing with a desperate human urgency. And he finds what he is looking for. A thick, dark green bottle once used for storing rum appears at his feet, its glass slick with the eternal dampness. A roll of parchment materializes on the lid of a nearby barrel, held down by a spectral stone. A quill, its feather the color of a stormy sky, lies beside it. He falls to his knees. His hands, which a moment ago were so real to him, are once again pale and translucent, but now they tremble with a violent human emotion. He uncorks the bottle and begins to write. The words do not come easily. His mind is a swirling chaos of fragmented memories and profound, unspeakable sorrow. He does not write a coherent letter. He cannot. He writes what he feels. Lars, he scratches, the phantom ink appearing as a faint grey mark on the page. The sea is grey, always grey. I promised you a map. The map is a lie. The compass spins, it spins, Lars. It never stops. He pauses, a shudder racking his entire form. He remembers a song his mother used to sing, a simple lullaby about a sailor who returns home with the tide. He tries to write the words, but he can only remember fragments. The tide comes in, the tide, home. He abandons the words. He is a man of the sea, not a man of letters. He begins to draw. With a sudden, desperate clarity, he draws the coastline of his home village. He draws the sharp, familiar shape of the headland known as the Widow's Peak. He draws the small, protected cove where he and Lars used to swim as boys. He draws the crooked, leaning shape of the old lighthouse. He pours all of his love, all of his longing, all of his profound, hopeless grief into this simple, heartfelt map. It is the only true chart he has seen in 100 years. When he is finished, his hand is shaking so badly he can barely roll the parchment. He pushes it into the bottle. He seals it with the waiting cork. And then he pauses. He holds the bottle in his hands, a fragile vessel containing the last dying ember of his human soul. He knows this act is futile. He knows the bottle will likely drift in this phantom sea for another eternity, unseen, unfound. But the act is what matters. It is an act of defiance. It is a shout into the void. It is a testament to the fact that here, in this place of endless, silent despair, a man named Eric once lived, and he once loved his brother. A single, small and spectral candle appears beside him on the deck. Its flame is a soft, gentle yellow, the color of a candle in a window on a dark night. It is born of the memory of his mother's lullaby, of his brother's laughter, of the warmth of his own hearth. It is a flame that will burn forever but give off no heat. He carefully attaches it to the neck of the bottle. He stumbles back to the ship's rail, his movements no longer graceful but clumsy with the weight of his rediscovered humanity. He holds the bottle over the side. He looks down at the grey, glassy and indifferent water, and with a final, silent prayer, a prayer not for his own salvation, but for the safe passage of his memory, he lets it go. It does not splash. It simply enters the water, the bottle and its eternal flame suddenly a part of the grey sea. It begins to drift away from the ship, a single, tiny, heartbreakingly lonely point of light in the vast, eternal gloom. Eric watches it until it is gone, until it is swallowed by the mist. He watches it for a long time after it has vanished. And then slowly, agonizingly, the memory begins to fade. The sharp, vivid image of his brother's face begins to blur at the edges. The sound of his laughter grows faint. The warmth of his home port recedes. The terrible, beautiful pain of his grief begins to dull, replaced by the familiar, comfortable and soul-destroying numbness of his curse. His face smooths out, the lines of human sorrow dissolving, replaced by the blank mask of his eternal duty. His trembling ceases. He blinks once, slowly. He turns away from the rail and sees the glowing rope lying in a messy pile on the deck. With a sigh that makes no sound, he stoops down and begins to coil it. His movements once again fluid, graceful, and utterly, completely meaningless. The flicker of humanity is over. The endless task has resumed. Let us now retreat from the specific, from the singular, agonizing moment of Eric's remembrance and pull back to observe the whole, terrible and beautiful ecosystem of the damned ship. The curse is not a static thing. It is a dynamic, self-sustaining system, a perfectly balanced and eternally functioning machine of sorrow. Every part has its function, and every function serves to reinforce the whole. Consider the ship's relationship with the sea itself. To the crew, the sea is their world, their floor, their horizon. But it is a profoundly passive entity. It does not rage, it does not swell, it does not offer the terrifying, life-affirming spectacle of a storm. A storm would be a mercy, a break in the monotony, a challenge to be met. But the sea of the damned is as smooth as grey silk, as placid as a mill pond. Its damnation is not its fury, but its absolute and utter indifference. It is a sea without personality, without mood. It is the perfect blank canvas upon which their own internal torment is projected. The ship glides upon this sea, but it does not truly interact with it. There is no wake. The sharp, elegant prow of the siren's lament cuts through the spectral water, but the water closes behind it without a ripple, without a trace, as if the ship were a ghost passing through a wall. This lack of a wake is one of the most subtle and soul-crushing aspects of their existence. A wake is a sign of passage, a mark of progress, a temporary scar on the face of the water that proves a ship has been there, that it is moving from one place to another. This ship leaves no such mark. Its passage is traceless, its journey without evidence. It is moving, always moving, but it is never, ever going anywhere. The internal atmosphere of the ship is just as meticulously curated by the curse. There is no weather. The temperature is always a neutral, unchanging cool, neither warm enough for comfort nor cold enough for the sharp sting of true suffering. It is the temperature of a crypt, of a place untouched by the living sun. There is no rain, only the perpetual, fine and clammy mist that seems to rise from the ship's own timbers, keeping everything perpetually damp, perpetually slick with a moisture that never evaporates. The silence is the most pervasive element of all. It is not the mere absence of sound. It is a thick, weighted, and active silence. It is a silence that absorbs all potential noise. When the carpenter's spectral plane passes over his eternally smooth plank, the expected shush of wood being shaved is swallowed by the silence. When the cook's knife chops his phantom vegetables, the sharp thump on the cutting board is consumed before it can be born. The crew themselves are silent. They do not speak. They do not cough. They do not sigh in a way that can be heard. Their damnation has stripped them of the very need for language. After a century of performing the same task alongside the same men, what could there possibly be left to say? Their communication is now the perfect, silent, and intuitive dance of their shared, repetitive movements. This silent, sterile, and unchanging environment is crucial to the curse's effectiveness. The human mind, even in the depths of despair, is a resilient thing. It seeks patterns, it seeks novelty, it seeks distraction. But on this ship, there is none. There are no new sights, no new sounds, no new sensations to distract them from the eternal, internal loop of their own specific torment. The curse has created the perfect sensory deprivation chamber, ensuring that each man is utterly, completely, and eternally alone with his own private, tailor-made hell. The source of the ship's own pale internal light is another of its profound mysteries. It does not come from the sky or from the lanterns. It seems to emanate from the very substance of the damned themselves. It is the faint, cold glow of their own life force, their own souls, siphoned off by the curse and turned into a perpetual, unwavering illumination. They are, quite literally, fueled by their own damnation. They are the ship's engine and the ship's light. Their sorrow is the power that keeps the sails full. Their hopelessness is the fuel that keeps the ship moving. They are prisoners, but they are also the prison itself, a perfectly closed, self-sustaining system of despair. And in the center of it all, the linchpin of this entire terrible machine is the captain. Elias Thorne is not just another prisoner. He is the battery. He is the central processor. His torment is the most refined, for his sin was the greatest. While his crew are locked in loops of physical action or simple, repetitive craft, his damnation is purely, savagely intellectual. He is condemned to a state of eternal cognitive dissonance. He stands at his chart, a monument to the failure of reason. He is a man of logic, and he is presented with an illogical world. He is a man of science, and he is presented with an unscientific reality. He is not allowed the mercy of madness, the escape of a mind that simply shatters under the strain. The curse keeps his mind perfectly sharp, perfectly clear, perfectly rational. He is forced, every second of every eternal day, to attempt to apply the unwavering rules of his scientific worldview to a world that maliciously and deliberately breaks them. He sees the compass spin, and his mind, his brilliant, analytical mind, works furiously to find a reason, a magnetic anomaly, a flaw in the instrument. He will dismantle the spectral compass, inspect its phantom workings, and find them flawless. He will reassemble it, only to see the needle spin with the same frantic, mocking energy. He will never accept that the concept of north has simply ceased to exist for him. His mind is incapable of making that leap. And so, he is condemned to forever search for a rational explanation for an irrational phenomenon. He is the true ghost. While his crew are echoes of their past selves, he is a ghost of a future that never came to be. He is the ghost of the man who would have mapped the world, the ghost of the man who would have solved the last of the sea's great mysteries. His damnation is to live forever in the shadow of his own squandered, brilliant potential, forever wrestling with a single, impossible, and elegantly cruel equation. The ship moves, the crew toils, the captain thinks, the fog shrouds all. It is a world without progress, without change, without hope. It is a perfect, silent, and eternal machine. It is the masterpiece of a vengeful sea. It is the siren's lament. The question that a living mind might ask is, what is the purpose of this eternal, pointless voyage? A ship, by its very nature, is a thing of purpose. It travels from a point of departure to a point of arrival. It carries cargo, or passengers or soldiers. It has a reason to exist. But the siren's lament has no destination. It carries no cargo but the weight of its own sorrow. It has no purpose other than the continuation of its own existence. Or does it? The legend, as told by sailors like Kalen, frames the ship as a warning, a cautionary tale against hubris. In this, the legend is correct. The ship is a living, sailing sermon. Its appearances in the world of the living are not random. They are moments when the veil between the real and the unreal grows thin, when the fog is thick enough, when the silence is deep enough. In these moments, the ship slips through the cracks, a spectral messenger, a terrifying and sorrowful reminder to the living of the price of pride. It serves as a moral anchor in the chaotic world of the sea, a story that keeps sailors humble, that reminds them to respect the ancient, unknowable power they travel upon. But from within the curse itself, the purpose feels different. For Captain Thorn, the purpose of the voyage is still and will always be the completion of his great northern chart. He does not know he is cursed. He does not know he is a ghost. In his sharp, rational, and eternally tormented mind, he is still the brilliant explorer, Elias Thorn, the master of his vessel, temporarily beset by a series of inexplicable and deeply frustrating navigational anomalies. He believes with every fiber of his being that if he just thinks hard enough, if he takes one more reading, if he makes one more calculation, he will solve the puzzle. The fog will lift, the compass will steady, the stars will return to their rightful places, and he will be able to finish his work. His eternal, hopeless optimism, the very scientific faith that led him to his damnation, is now the engine of his torment. The purpose, for him, is the pursuit of a solution that will never, ever be found. For the crew, the purpose is even simpler, and perhaps even sadder. Their purpose is the task itself. Their humanity has been stripped away, leaving only the muscle memory of their profession. A sailor's purpose is to work the ship, and so they work. They are not sustained by hope, for they have none. They are not driven by fear, for there is nothing left to be afraid of. They are sustained by the rhythm of their labor. The swabbing, the coiling, the climbing, the measuring, these are the beats of their eternal, monotonous song. Their purpose is to perform their duty with a perfection that has become meaningless. They are the ghostly embodiment of work for work's sake, a silent, moving monument to the dignity and the tragedy of human diligence. And what of the moments of remembrance, the letters in the bottles? This, perhaps, is the true, hidden purpose of the curse, the most exquisitely cruel and compassionate twist of the sea's vengeance. The curse does not allow for the mercy of complete oblivion. It understands that the truest essence of humanity is not in reason nor in labor, but in connection, in love, in memory. And so it allows these flickers. It allows the memory of a brother's laughter, of a daughter's face, to pierce the grey monotony. These moments are not a kindness. They are a recalibration of the pain. They are a restoking of the fires of sorrow. They serve to remind the damned of the precise nature of what they have lost. It is a way for the sea to say, do not forget why you are here. You are not here because you were a sailor or a cook or a cartographer. You are here because your captain, in his arrogance, severed his connection to the world of humility and respect. And so you are all severed from your own connections, from the loves and the lives that once gave your work meaning. The letters in the bottles are not a hope for rescue. They are the final, perfect, and eternally recurring act of their damnation, the expression of a love that can no longer be received. And so the ship sails on. It is a warning to the living, a puzzle to its captain, and a task to its crew. It is a place of profound silence, punctuated by the occasional, agonizing cry of a remembered love. It moves through a sea of its own making, forever chasing a horizon that is not there. It is a perfect and terrible work of art, a story being told over and over again, for no one and for everyone. It is the ghost ship, the siren's lament, and its voyage is, and always will be, eternal. The sea serpent remained tethered to the bustling, noisy docks of Whitefall for 3 more days, a period of time that for Finn felt as long and as strange as a lifetime. For the rest of the crew, these were days of welcome, earthly, and deeply appreciated respite. They were days of solid, unmoving ground underfoot, a sensation that at first felt alien and then profoundly reassuring. They were days of hot, savoury meals in the crowded, smoky warmth of the town's 2 taverns, of strong, dark ale that washed away the lingering, ghostly chill of the fog. They were days of mending sails in the weak but real sunlight, their hands moving with a familiar, practiced skill, their voices loud and their jokes coarse as they worked. They embraced the mundane, the physical, the tangible with an almost desperate energy. The memory of the silent, glowing ship and the profound, soul-crushing silence it had brought with it was a thing they actively, collectively, and forcefully pushed away. It became a dark, unsettling and shared dream from which they had now, thankfully, awoken. They scrubbed the decks with a furious energy, patched the canvas with meticulous care, and loaded the new cargo of wool and iron ore, their movements filled with a deliberate, almost aggressive normalcy. Each completed task, each shouted command, each burst of easy laughter was a small, defiant act of forgetting, a nail pounded into the coffin of a memory they all wished to bury at sea. But for Finn, there was no escape, no forgetting. The vision of the siren's lament was not a dream he could wake from. It had become a part of his own internal landscape, a permanent, misty and sorrowful archipelago in the vast, silent sea of his own soul. He performed his duties as a ship's boy with the quiet diligence he had always possessed. His body moved with the familiar, practiced rhythm of his station, swabbing the decks until the planks were clean, coiling ropes into perfect, tight circles, fetching tools for the ship's carpenter with a silent nod. But his mind, his spirit, was far away, sailing on that other silent ocean. The loud, cheerful chatter of his crewmates sounded distant and thin to him, like the cries of gulls from a far-off, unreachable shore. The solid, familiar wood of the deck beneath his bare feet felt strangely insubstantial, as if he were walking on a thin, fragile crust of reality suspended over a deep, grey and profoundly sorrowful void. He felt disconnected, a ghost haunting his own life, his own ship. The simple, physical world had lost its primacy. It now seemed like a shadow, and the true, solid reality was the pale, silent ship that glided through his every waking thought. He saw Ilara only once more on the 2nd day. He had been sent high into the rigging of the mainmast, a small pot of tar in his hand, tasked with sealing a frayed section of rope. From his high, lonely perch, he had a panoramic view of the entire harbour and the town nestled against the green hills, and he saw her. She was a small, solitary figure in a dark, weather-beaten cloak, standing at the very end of the longest, most exposed pier, the one that stretched farthest out into the grey embrace of the sea. She was staring out at the open water, her back to the town, her posture one of absolute, heartbreaking stillness. He could see, even from this distance, that she was not looking for ships anymore. The frantic, hopeful scanning of the horizon was gone. It had been replaced by a quiet, somber finality, a stillness that spoke of a hope that had finally, painfully been relinquished for good. Finn's heart clenched with a sharp, sudden pang of guilt. He wondered if his own sad, silent presence on the bench in the square had been the final, gentle blow that had shattered her decade of fragile hope. He wondered if the pity in his eyes had communicated the terrible truth his words had withheld, if she had looked at him and somehow understood that he had seen her father's fate, and that it was a fate far worse than a simple, clean death in the ice. He did not go to her again. He had no comfort to offer, for he had taken her private, personal burden of sorrow and made it his own. His continued silence was the only kindness he had left to give her. On the morning of the 3rd day, the last of the new cargo was loaded and secured. The sails were fully repaired and ready, and Captain Alistair, his face a mask of stern, pragmatic impatience, gave the order to prepare for departure. A sense of cheerful, bustling anticipation filled the sea serpent. The men were eager to be at sea again, to feel the familiar rhythm of the waves under the keel, to put the strange, unsettling port of Whitefall and its ghostly memories behind them for good. They were ready to return to the simple, honest, and understandable world of wind, water, and work. But Finn felt a cold, deep, and paralyzing dread. The thought of returning to the old life, the life of simply sailing from one point on a map to another, of hauling wool and fish while pretending not to know about the other, silent ship that sailed a different, eternal sea according to a different spectral map, was unbearable. He felt like a man who had been told a profound, world-altering secret about the nature of reality, and was now being asked to go on living his life as if he had never heard it, to ignore the ghost that now sat at every meal, that now haunted every quiet moment of the night watch. As the crew began the noisy, bustling work of casting off the thick, heavy mooring lines, Finn knew, with a certainty that was as terrifying as it was absolute, that he could not go with them. He made his way, his legs feeling strangely light and disconnected from his body, to the captain's small, cramped cabin at the stern of the ship. Captain Alistair was at his desk, his brow furrowed in concentration as he frowned at a long, complex ledger, his quill scratching angrily at the parchment. He looked up, his expression a mixture of annoyance and impatience as Finn entered without knocking. "What is it, boy? We are casting off. Your station is at the foremast." Finn's heart hammered in his chest, a frantic bird trapped in the cage of his ribs. He had no good reason to give, no logical, sensible explanation for what he was about to do. He had only a deep, unshakable, and profoundly irrational certainty that was more real to him than the ship he stood on. "Captain," he said, his voice quiet but steady, surprising even himself with its calm resolve. "I cannot sail with you. I must ask to be released from my service." Captain Alistair stared at him, his mouth slightly agape. His bushy grey eyebrows, which seemed to have a life of their own, knitted together in a mask of pure, unadulterated disbelief and irritation. "Released?" he barked, the word exploding in the small cabin. "Don't be a fool, boy. You have a good berth on this ship. You are a hard worker. You have a future. The sea is a hard life, yes, but it is an honest one. It is a real one. Where would you go? What would you do? Starve on the docks of this miserable, fog-bound town?" "I don't know, sir," Finn admitted, and the honesty of it was both terrifying and liberating, and he did not know. He had no plan, no destination, no chart for the course he was about to set. He had only a direction, away from this life of simple, honest reality, and toward the profound, sorrowful mystery that now consumed him. "I only know that I cannot stay. I cannot unsee what I have seen." The captain searched Finn's young, serious face. He was prepared to be angry, to dismiss this as a boyish whim, a fit of melancholy, but he saw no fear in the boy's eyes. He saw no petulance, no romantic foolishness. He saw a quiet, solemn, and deeply unsettling resolve, a stillness that was utterly out of place in a boy of his age. Alistair was a man of ledgers and cargo manifests, a man of tides and winds, a man who believed only in what he could see and touch and weigh and measure. But he had also been on the deck on the night of the fog. He had seen the silent, glowing ship. He did not speak of it. He did not allow his mind to dwell on it, but the memory was there, a cold, hard, indigestible knot in the corner of his pragmatic soul. And he now saw a reflection of that same unsettling, otherworldly stillness in the boy's steady gaze. He let out a long, weary sigh, a sound of pure exasperation that was also a sound of defeat. "This is foolishness, boy. Utter foolishness. The sea will swallow a lone wanderer whole, and it will not even notice it has done so." He scowled, his pride stung by this inexplicable desertion. He dipped his quill in the inkpot with a sharp, angry gesture and made a slashing notation in his ledger, officially striking Finn from the crew list. "Fine. Your pay for the voyage is forfeit. Now get off my ship. I'll not have you haunting my decks with your strange moods and your bad luck." Finn did not need to be told twice. He nodded once, a gesture of quiet respect and gratitude, and backed out of the cabin. He made his way to the forecastle and gathered his meagre belongings, a spare woolen shirt, a small, smooth whetstone for sharpening knives, and the precious, comforting wooden bird from Master Kalen, and wrapped them in a small, neat bundle. He did not say goodbye to the crew. They were already strangers to him, inhabitants of a world he no longer belonged to. As he walked across the wide, groaning gangplank onto the solid, unmoving stone of the pier, he felt a profound and terrifying sense of release, as if the very ground beneath him had fallen away. He was untethered, a ship that had deliberately, and perhaps foolishly, cut its own mooring lines. He stood on the dock and watched as the sea serpent, the only home he had known for the past year, skillfully maneuvered its way out of the crowded harbour. He saw the familiar figures of the crew moving about the decks, their forms growing smaller and smaller with each passing moment. The ship caught the brisk offshore wind, her patched, work-worn sails filling with a satisfying whump, and she began to move with purpose toward the open sea, toward her next port, her next cargo, her next chapter. Finn felt a sharp, sudden pang of loss, a deep, primal sadness for the simple, honest, and uncomplicated life he was leaving behind. But beneath the sadness was a hard, cold, and unwavering layer of resolve. He watched until the ship was just a speck on the grey horizon, and then he watched for a long time after it had vanished completely. Finally, he turned his back on the sea and walked into the winding, misty, and unfamiliar streets of Whitefall, a stranger in a strange land with no purpose but the one the ghost ship had so cruelly and so generously given him. Finn spent the next season of his life in the town of Whitefall, but he was not truly there. He was an anchorite, a hermit, his true existence taking place not in the physical world, but in the internal, misty landscape of his obsession. He took a series of odd jobs to survive, his body performing the tasks required to earn a few coins for bread and a roof over his head, while his mind was perpetually at sea. He mended nets for the local fishermen, his fingers growing nimble and calloused, the salty, fishy smell of the ropes a constant reminder of the world he was both a part of and separate from. He scrubbed the stone floors of the greasiest tavern, the harsh smell of spilled ale and old smoke a welcome assault on his senses. A brief, earthy distraction from the ethereal silence that usually filled his thoughts. He carried heavy, rough-sawn crates on the docks, the strain in his muscles a reassuring confirmation that he was still a creature of flesh and blood. He was a good worker, quiet, diligent, and utterly unobtrusive, and so people quickly learned to leave him alone. He rented a small, cold, and perpetually drafty room above the town bakery, a room that always smelled faintly and comfortingly of yeast, flour, and wood smoke, a scent of life and sustenance that stood in stark contrast to the sterile, lifeless world he was studying. But his true life began at night. After his work was done, after he had eaten his simple meal of bread and cheese, he would walk. He became a familiar, solitary figure in the town, the quiet boy who walked for hours in the deepening twilight. He explored every corner of the small, lonely town, its winding, cobbled streets, its narrow, shadowed alleyways. He explored the surrounding windswept coastline, learning the shape of every rock, every cove, every treacherous, tide-swept channel. He learned the moods of the sea, not as a sailor upon its surface, but as an observer from the shore, watching the tide come and go with a new, scholarly intensity, listening to the changing voice of the waves as they crashed against the black, jagged rocks. He became a creature of the liminal spaces, of the shoreline, of the twilight, a quiet boy always staring out at the grey, featureless horizon, as if expecting a visitor. His true work, however, his great and secret project, took place in his small, cold room by the flickering, unsteady light of a single, precious tallow candle. He had used his first week's earnings to buy a small stack of expensive, clean parchment and a small, earthenware pot of black, viscous ink. And with the memory of Alara's father, the heartbroken cartographer, guiding his hand, he began to draw. He was not a natural artist. His hands were those of a sailor, not a scholar, but his focus was absolute, his memory eidetic, his purpose unwavering. He began, as was only right, by drawing the ghost ship. He drew the siren's lament from every conceivable angle, pouring all of his concentration into capturing the elegant, cruel, and perfect lines of her hull, the impossible, sorrowful fullness of her sails, the intricate, spectral web of her rigging. He spent a week on a single drawing of Captain Elias Thorne, standing at the wheel, his face a mask of brilliant, eternal torment. He drew the pale, sad, repetitive figures of her crew, each one a small, detailed portrait of a specific, endless, and meaningless task. Then he began to draw maps. Not maps of the real, physical world, with its trade routes and its safe harbors. He began to create maps of the sea's other, hidden reality. He drew the serpent's jaw, not as a place of rocks and dangerous currents, but as a place of profound and waiting silence, a gateway between worlds. He tried to map the currents of the fog, the eddies of the mist, giving them names, speculating on their origins. He created a detailed chart, attempting to plot the slow, hopeless, aimless drift of the single spectral candlelight he had seen on the water. His small, cold room became a shrine to the legend, its damp stone walls slowly being covered with his strange, obsessive, and hauntingly beautiful drawings. He was, without knowing it, continuing the work of Alara's father. He was attempting to map the unmappable, to bring the tools of reason and representation to a world that defied both. He also became a dedicated, almost invisible listener. He would spend his evenings in the darkest, smokiest corner of the sailors' tavern, nursing a single mug of cheap ale for hours, making himself a part of the shadows. He was not there for the drink or for the company. He was there to listen. He would listen for any mention, any whisper, any drunken, half-remembered fragment of a story that concerned the silent, glowing ship. Most of the time, the tales were of common sea terrors, of storms, of krakens, of sirens. The tale of the siren's lament was a deeper, quieter, and more respected fear, not one to be spoken of lightly. But occasionally, perhaps once a month, an old, weary sailor, a man whose face was a roadmap of 100 perilous voyages, his eyes clouded with memory and too much cheap ale, would speak of it. He would speak of a time, 30 or 40 or even 50 years ago, when he, as a young boy not much older than Finn, had been trapped in a deep, unnatural fog and had seen a pale, silent ship glide past, a ship that moved without a wind, its sails full, its decks manned by a crew of silent, sorrowful ghosts. Finn would listen, his heart pounding, his senses on high alert, and he would absorb every single, precious detail. When the story was over, he would quietly, carefully approach the old sailor. He would buy him another drink, and he would ask his quiet, careful questions. In which part of the sea did you see her? In what season? What was the tide doing? What was the phase of the moon? The old sailors, flattered by the boy's intense interest and their memories loosened by the ale, would tell him everything they could remember. Finn became a collector of these sightings, a connoisseur of these fragments of data. He would take them back to his small room and, with the precision of a scholar, he would mark them on his own great, evolving and secret chart of the Northern Sea. Slowly, over the course of that long, lonely and obsessive winter, a pattern began to emerge from the scattered points on his map. The sightings were not random. They were not the aimless wanderings of a lost spirit. They occurred in specific, deep water channels, far from the common, shallow trade routes. They occurred during a certain, predictable phase of the moon, at a certain time of year, when the tides were at their highest, and the atmospheric conditions were most conducive to the formation of deep, impenetrable fogs. He began to believe, with a certainty that thrilled and terrified him in equal measure, that the ghost ship, for all its aimless wandering within its own reality, was following a course in his. A great, slow, circular and eternal patrol route around the bleakest, most mysterious and most unfrequented corners of the Northern Sea. A new, terrifying and exhilarating idea began to form in his mind, an idea so audacious it made him feel lightheaded. What if he could do more than just record her past appearances? What if he could predict her next one? What if he could deliberately, purposefully place himself in her path? He did not know what he would do when he found her. He had no plan to fight her, no hope to save her, no intention of joining her. He only knew, with an unshakable, soul-deep certainty, that he had to see her again. He had to get closer. He had to understand. The mystery of her existence had become the central question of his own. As the first, faint signs of spring began to breathe a little life back into the cold, grey land, Finn made his decision. He used the meager collection of coins he had saved over the winter to purchase a small, sturdy, and very old fishing boat. A boat so weathered, it looked as if it had been carved from a single piece of driftwood. It was barely large enough for one man and his supplies. He spent the next month working on it with a frantic, focused energy, patching her hull, mending her small single sail, re-tarring her seams, making her as seaworthy as his limited skills would allow. The fishermen in the harbour watched him, their weathered faces a mixture of pity and contempt, shaking their heads at the boy's obvious foolishness. To sail out alone into the treacherous, unpredictable northern sea in such a small vessel was not just dangerous, it was a deliberate act of suicide. But Finn was not afraid. The fear of a simple, watery death in a storm was nothing compared to the fear of living a long, empty, and meaningless life on the shore, forever haunted by the mystery he had left unsolved, forever wondering what lay out there in the fog. On the morning of the first high spring tide, under a sky the colour of a pearl, Finn loaded his small boat. He packed casks of fresh water, nets filled with salted fish and hard, dry bread, his precious, rolled-up collection of strange, sorrowful maps and, in a special protected pouch, the small wooden bird. He untied his mooring line, raised his small patched sail, and without a single look back at the town that had been his purgatory, he steered his small, foolish, and profoundly purposeful boat out of the harbour. He set a course not for the next port, not for any land at all, but for a specific, empty point on his own secret map, a point in the deep, grey and waiting silence of the open sea. The first days of Finn's solitary voyage were a harsh and humbling education. The sea, which he had known only from the sturdy, elevated deck of the sea serpent, was a different creature altogether from the cockpit of his small, vulnerable boat. Here he was not upon the water, but in it. The waves were not distant, rolling hills, but immediate, intimate presences that slapped against the hull and sent cold, stinging spray over the bow. The wind was not a force to be harnessed by a complex system of sails and rigging, but a personal, often fickle and sometimes violent companion. He was no longer a small, anonymous cog in the well-oiled machine of a large crew. He was the captain, the navigator, the lookout, the helmsman, and the entire crew, all at once. His life became a simple, stripped-down rhythm of survival and purpose. The sun and the stars were his only clock, the ache in his muscles his only master. He would wake before dawn, his small boat rocking gently in the swell, the air cold and damp. He would eat a simple, joyless meal of dry bread and salted fish, his eyes constantly scanning the horizon, reading the clouds, feeling the subtle shifts in the wind. He learned to read the sea's language in a new and deeper way, to recognize the change in the water's color that signaled a coming squall, to understand the meaning of a particular pattern of waves, to identify the lonely, mournful cry of a northern fulmar. His days were filled with the constant, demanding work of keeping his small vessel afloat and on course. He managed the single sail, adjusting it to catch the faintest breath of wind, or reefing it tightly in a sudden, violent squall. He bailed the bilge water that seemed to seep in from a dozen tiny, invisible cracks. He constantly checked his course, not with a sophisticated compass, for he had none, but with the sun by day and the pole star by night, and with the strange, obsessive, hand-drawn charts that were spread out before him, weighted down with smooth, grey stones from the beaches of Whitefall. His nights were long and deeply lonely. The sea at night was a vast, breathing, and profoundly indifferent darkness. The world shrank to the small, bobbing circle of his boat, a tiny, fragile island of life in an infinite black ocean. He would sleep in short, intermittent bursts, his body wedged into the small, cuddy cabin, his ear always attuned to the sound of the wind and the water. He learned to distinguish between the normal, healthy groans of his boat and the sharp, alarming crack that might signal a split plank or a failing mast. In the moments of calm, when the sea was a gentle, rolling expanse of deep indigo and the sky was a brilliant, breathtaking tapestry of stars, a profound sense of peace would sometimes settle over him. In these moments, he felt a deep, almost mystical connection to the world around him. He was a part of it, a small, solitary speck of consciousness in a vast, living universe. But these moments were always tinged with a deep, underlying melancholy. For he knew that he was not just a part of this world, he was also searching for its ghost. His true work, the work of his soul, was the constant study of his maps. He would spend hours poring over them, his finger tracing the lines he had drawn, his mind sifting through the data he had collected. He had calculated a destination, a specific empty patch of ocean where, according to his research, the accumulated sightings of the Siren's Lament suggested a convergence. It was a place far from any known land, a place of deep water and treacherous, unpredictable fogs. He knew that to sail there was to sail off the edge of the known world. As he sailed farther and farther north, the character of the sea began to change. The water, which had been a deep blue, slowly faded to a cold, hard grey. The air grew colder, the wind sharper. The sun, when it appeared, was a weak, pale disk that offered little warmth. He began to see great, ghostly shapes in the water, immense, floating islands of ice, their surfaces carved by the wind into fantastical, architectural forms. They drifted silently, majestically, their presence both beautiful and deeply menacing. The world was becoming emptier, starker, and more elemental. It was during the third week of his voyage that the fog found him again. It did not roll in from the horizon. It seemed to rise up from the sea itself, a cold, wet, and silent exhalation. Within an hour, his world had once again shrunk to a small, grey, and claustrophobic circle. The wind died completely. The sea became a flat, glassy, and unnervingly still sheet of grey. The only sound was the faint, rhythmic dripping of condensation from his sail onto the deck. Finn was not afraid. This was what he had been seeking. He was now in the world of the ghost ship. He lowered his sail, its damp canvas collapsing with a soft, defeated sigh. He was becalmed, adrift, just as he had been on the Sea Serpent. But this time, he was not an accidental witness. He was a willing participant. He was waiting. For 2 days, he drifted in the profound, waiting silence. He did not eat. He barely slept. He sat in the cockpit of his small boat, his senses on high alert, listening, watching. The silence was absolute. It was a silence so deep it seemed to have a sound of its own, a low, subsonic hum that he felt in his teeth, in the bones of his skull. It was the sound of the world holding its breath. On the evening of the second day, as the grey light began to fade into a deeper, more profound grey, he saw it. A faint, internal luminescence in the fog directly ahead. His heart, which had been beating a slow, steady rhythm, began to pound against his ribs. It was the same pale, milky glow, the same sourceless, spectral light. It grew steadier, brighter, and then, slowly, silently, magnificently, the Siren's Lament emerged from the fog. She was more real, more solid than he remembered. She was no longer a distant, ethereal vision, but a present, physical, and overwhelming reality. She was a great, pale mountain of a ship, her flawless hull seeming to absorb the grey light, her impossible white sails towering over his own small, pathetic vessel. She was gliding directly toward him, and for the first time a cold, primal fear pierced through his obsessive resolve. He was a tiny, fragile thing in the path of a ghost. But she did not hit him. When she was but a few ships' lengths away, she seemed to turn, not with the physical movement of a rudder, but with a slow, graceful, and impossible pivot, as if the sea itself were turning beneath her. She began to glide past him, parallel to his own small boat, so close that he could have reached out and touched her cold, pale hull. He was no longer just an observer. He was a part of the scene. The profound silence of the ghost ship enveloped his own small boat, and for a moment, he felt as if he, too, had passed through the veil. He looked up at her decks, and he saw the crew. They were, as he remembered, pale, silent figures locked in their eternal, pointless tasks. But now they were not just distant figures in a vision, they were men. He could see the faint, ghostly details of their faces, the sad, empty set of their eyes. He saw the lookout at the masthead, his spyglass raised, his form passing directly over Finn's own small mast. He saw the sailors coiling their glowing ropes. And then his eyes were drawn to the great cabin windows at the stern of the ship. The windows were dark, but through them he could see the faint, cold, steady glow of the lantern that hung over the chart table. And he saw a figure bent over the table, a figure with a quill in his hand, Thomas, the cartographer, Ilara's father. As the great cabin glided past him, Finn felt an overwhelming, inexplicable impulse. It was not a thought, but a pure, physical need. He reached into the small pouch at his belt and took out the small, smooth, wooden bird that Master Kalen had carved for him. It was a thing of the living world, a thing of solid, honest wood, a thing of the land. With a cry that was a mixture of a shout and a sob, a sound that tore through the profound silence, he threw the small bird. It flew in a perfect, graceful arc, a small, dark shape against the pale, glowing hull of the ghost ship. It sailed through the open window of the great cabin and landed with a soft, solid, and impossibly loud thud on the surface of the cartographer's chart table. For a single, eternal, and breathtaking moment, everything stopped. The figure of Thomas, the cartographer, who had been hunched over his work for 100 years, froze. His hand, which had been moving in its endless, graceful loop, stilled. He slowly, very slowly, lifted his head, and his pale, sorrowful, and ghostly eyes looked directly out the window, directly at Finn. For a fraction of a second, there was a flicker of something in those eyes. Not recognition, not understanding, but confusion. A crack in the perfect, smooth, and eternal surface of his damnation. Then the moment was over. The cartographer's head lowered once more to his work. His hand resumed its silent, ceaseless drawing. The ship continued its slow, silent, and inexorable glide. It passed Finn's small boat and was slowly, silently, swallowed by the fog once more. Her pale glow faded, leaving Finn alone in the profound darkness and the returning, familiar silence of his own world. He sat for a long time in his small boat, his body trembling, his mind reeling from what he had just witnessed. He had done the impossible. He had thrown a stone from the world of the living into the still, placid, and eternal lake of the damned. He had created a ripple. He did not know what it meant. He did not know if it was an act of profound kindness or of unimaginable cruelty. He only knew that he had touched the ghost ship, and he knew, with a terrifying and exhilarating certainty, that the ghost ship had, in its own silent, sorrowful way, touched him back. His journey was not over. It had just truly begun. The ship moves. This is the first, last, and only truth, the unwavering axiom upon which their entire cyclical universe is built. It is the alpha and the omega of its own story, a tale told over and over again in a silent, visual language of perpetual, unchanging motion. It glides, a serene and elegant predator of souls, through a sea that is not a true sea, under a sky that is not a true sky. This is not a vessel traversing a physical space, not an object moving through a medium from a point of departure to a point of arrival. It is a self-contained, mobile, and everlasting moment of damnation, a bubble of exquisitely tailored reality set adrift in the great, unfeeling, and timeless void. Its name, the Siren's Lament, is a whisper on the lips of living sailors, a chilling, cautionary chord in the mournful, ancient song of maritime folklore, a name synonymous with dread, ill omen, and the folly of pride. But to those who sail upon her, the name is a forgotten word from a forgotten language, a sound without meaning. There is no before and no after. There is no past to regret and no future to hope for. There is only the ship and the fog and the task. The fog is their ocean and their sky, their firmament and their abyss. It is a perpetual, shifting, and utterly featureless landscape of pearlescent, luminous grey. Sometimes it is thin and ethereal, a series of gauzy, spectral curtains that cling to the intricate rigging like the gossamer webs of some colossal, celestial spider. In these moments, the ship seems to swim through a sea of diluted milk, its own form hazy and indistinct, a dream of a ship in a world made of dreams. At other times, the fog is a thick, wet, and suffocating blanket, a physical, pressing presence that closes in on the ship from all sides, shrinking its already isolated world down to the finite, glowing length of its own pale, silent deck. During these times, to stand at the stern is to believe, with a chilling, logical certainty, that the bow no longer exists. The world becomes a small, damp, and deeply claustrophobic room, walled in on all sides by an impenetrable, shifting, and soundless nothingness. There is no sun here. There is no warm, benevolent, and life-giving star to mark the steady, comforting passage of day or to warm the translucent, perpetually cool skin of the crew. There is only a diffuse, sourceless, and deeply melancholic luminescence, a slightly brighter patch in the oppressive grey overhead that gives the cold, clinical, and passionless illusion of day. There is no moon, no scattering of familiar, friendly stars to guide the navigator's eye or to inspire a lonely watchman's thoughts. There is only a cold, internal, and phosphorescent glow that emanates from the ship itself. It is a light that seems to rise from within the very timbers of the hull, from the threads of the sails, from the pale, spectral flesh of the crew. It is the light of souls transmuted into a cold, unwavering radiance that casts long, indistinct, and utterly motionless shadows upon the deck. The ship itself is a masterpiece of divine, malevolent, and breathtaking contradiction. Her hull, carved from the phantom memory of pale, resilient, and perfectly seasoned northern pine, is flawless. It never weathers, never splinters, never succumbs to the insidious rot and relentless wear that plagues all living wood. It is as smooth and pale as polished bone, and it glides through the spectral water with a silent, frictionless grace. Her sails, as white as the memory of fresh, untouched snow, are always perfectly, impossibly full, their proud, curved bellies catching a wind that does not exist, a wind that makes no sound, has no temperature, and leaves no ripple on the glassy, grey, and utterly placid surface of the water. The intricate web of her rigging, a complex, beautiful system of ropes, pulleys, and block and tackle, is perpetually taut, humming with a silent, unseen tension. Yet the ropes never fray, never stretch, never slacken under their phantom load. The brass fittings, the binnacle housing the mad, spinning compass, the sextants locked in their velvet-lined, forever new boxes, the railings that circle the deck like a gilded cage, gleam with a soft, polished, and eternal luster, though no human hand has truly polished them in a century. The ship is in a state of perfect, unchanging, and deeply sterile preservation. It is a museum piece adrift in the endless sea of eternity, a perfect instrument for a task that can never be completed, a beautiful cage for a crew of broken, beautiful machines. And then there is the crew. They are figures of pale, indistinct light, their forms not quite solid, their edges blurred and softened by the eternal damp mist, as if they are watercolors left out in a gentle, endless rain. They move with a slow, graceful, and deeply hypnotic repetition, each man locked in the perfect, endless, and intricate loop of the specific task he was performing at the very moment the curse fell, the moment the world ended and their private eternity began. They are not ghosts in the traditional sense. They are not spirits bound by anger or a desire for revenge or an unfulfilled longing for a lost love. Such passionate, messy human emotions are luxuries they can no longer afford. They have been scoured away by a century of monotonous perfection. They are echoes. They are living recordings etched onto the very fabric of time by a will far greater and far more poetic than their own, forced to play out their final, futile acts of diligence for all of eternity. Their collective existence is a quiet, profound, and unending testament to their captain's fatal intellectual pride. On the quarterdeck, at the very heart of this silent, moving world, Captain Elias Thorne stands at his chart table. He is a monument to the spectacular, tragic failure of pure reason. His eyes, which hold the vast, weary, and maddening emptiness of a century of unsolved, unsolvable calculations, are fixed on the chaotic, shifting map before him. His mind, a brilliant and precise instrument that once sought to conquer the world with logic, is now locked in an eternal, agonizing, and intimate battle with a world that refuses to obey the laws he holds as sacred. He raises his sextant to his eye, a gesture of perfect, practiced grace, a habit of a lifetime now extended into a lifetime of habit. The numbers he sees on the finely etched scale are lies, a fluid, mocking script written on the face of the grey, featureless sky by a malicious, invisible hand. He turns to his magnificent chronometer, a triumph of human ingenuity, but its hands are a frantic, meaningless blur, measuring an eternity in every second and a second in every eternity. He dips his quill in the inkpot to make a notation, a correction, an attempt to impose the clean, sharp lines of order onto the seething, fluid chaos of the map. But in the very moment his quill touches the phantom parchment, something impossible happens. A sound. It is not a loud sound. It is a soft, gentle, almost trivial sound. Yet in this world of absolute, profound silence, it is as loud and as shocking as a clap of thunder. It is a soft, solid, and utterly alien thud. It is a sound that does not belong in this world of silent, spectral, and frictionless motion. It is the sound of a solid, real object making contact with another solid, real object. It is the sound of causality. It is the sound of a different reality intruding upon the perfect, closed loop of the dream. For the first time in 100 years, Captain Elias Thorne's concentration breaks. It shatters. His hand freezes in midair, the quill hovering a hair's breadth above the shifting, treacherous map. He lifts his head, his ancient, weary eyes widening with a flicker of profound, primal, and deeply intellectual confusion. The sound came from the great cabin behind him, from the library, from the domain of his cartographers, the very men tasked with transcribing this chaotic reality into a logical form. It was a sound so foreign, so jarring, so deeply wrong, that for a single, terrifying instant, the entire, intricate and self-sustaining illusion of the ship seems to stutter, to flicker like a candle flame in a sudden, violent draught. The ceaseless, silent hum of the curse, a vibration felt more than heard, falters for a single, breathtaking beat. The universe holds its breath. Inside the great cabin, the source of the impossible sound lies on the surface of a phantom map. It is a small, carved wooden bird. It is a thing of impossible solidity, of impossible reality. It is a dark, dense and tangible fact in a world of pale, translucent and shifting theory. It has weight, it has texture, it smells faintly, impossibly, of salt, of wind, of living wood, and of the warm, human hand that carved it. It is a splinter from the world of the living, a piece of hard, undeniable truth that has pierced the smooth, unblemished and eternal skin of their damnation. Thomas, the cartographer, Elara's father, is the one who bears the brunt of this cosmic intrusion. For a century, his existence has been a fluid, uninterrupted, and graceful loop of meaningless, beautiful creation. His hand, his eye, his mind have been united in the single, obsessive, and soul-destroying task of mapping a lie. But the sound, and now the sight, of the small wooden bird resting calmly on his chart has shattered that loop into a million pieces. His hand, holding the spectral quill, freezes. His head, which has been bent in a posture of intense concentration for a lifetime, slowly, stiffly lifts. His eyes, which for 100 years have seen only the shifting, phantom lines of his own creation, now fix upon the solid, unchanging and utterly defiant form of the wooden bird. And in the silent, dusty and long unused corridors of his mind, a chain reaction begins, a cascade of forgotten associations. The bird is made of real wood. Wood comes from trees. Trees grow on land. Land. The word itself is an explosion, a supernova in the silent, grey cosmos of his consciousness. He remembers land, not the shifting, illusory and treacherous coastlines on his charts, but real, solid and trustworthy land. He remembers the feel of soft, cool, damp grass under his bare feet as a boy. He remembers the rough, comforting and deeply textured bark of the ancient oak tree that stood in the garden of his small cottage. He remembers the rich, fertile and life-giving scent of damp earth after a spring rain. And with the memory of land comes the memory of a face. A small, serious and beautiful face framed by dark, curling hair with eyes the colour of a stormy sea but filled with a clear, unwavering light. Elara, his daughter. The name is not a memory, it is a physical blow. A forgotten, sealed, and rusted-shut door in his soul is blasted from its hinges, and a century of repressed love, of profound fatherly sorrow, of a grief so deep he had forgotten its existence, comes flooding out. The pale, translucent form of the cartographer begins to shimmer, to vibrate, to glow with a brighter, more agitated, and painfully human light. He remembers her laughter, a sound like small silver bells. He remembers holding her small, warm hand in his as they walked along a real, solid, and windswept beach, searching for strangely shaped shells. He remembers her tears on the day he left, the way they felt, hot and real, on his own hand. And he remembers the promise he made to her, a promise to return, a promise to bring her back a map of the edge of the world. He looks out the great cabin window and his eyes, for a single lucid and agonizing moment, see beyond the eternal fog. The curse's hold on his perception momentarily falters. He sees a small, solitary and impossibly real boat bobbing on the grey water. And in it, he sees a young boy, his face a mask of terror and awe, and a strange, profound empathy. He does not understand what he is seeing. The logical part of his mind, the part that has been a prisoner of the curse for a century, cannot process this impossible image. But his soul, his newly reawakened father's soul, understands. He knows, with a certainty that transcends the cruel logic of his damnation, that this boy and the wooden bird are connected. He sees a link, a bridge, a message from the world he lost. A question forms in his mind, the first real, coherent, and outward-facing question he has asked in 100 years. Who are you? But the curse is a powerful, ancient, and deeply intelligent system. It is, above all, a system designed to preserve itself. It cannot allow such a profound anomaly, such a dangerous spark of true consciousness, to persist. The beautiful, agonizing memory of his daughter's face begins to blur, to fade at the edges, like a watercolor painting in a flood. The scent of the damp earth recedes, replaced by the familiar, sterile smell of nothingness. The feeling of the solid ground beneath his feet dissolves, leaving him once again adrift in the eternal, unanchored present. The question in his mind, a bright, beautiful, and dangerous spark of true humanity, is extinguished, smothered by the great, grey, heavy, and comforting blanket of his damnation. His head, with a slow, inexorable, and almost visible reluctance, lowers once more to his work. His eyes lose their brief, sharp, and painful focus, becoming once again the sad, vacant, and soulless orbs of a man lost in a dream. His hand, which had been frozen in a moment of human recognition and rebellion, resumes its silent, graceful, and utterly meaningless drawing. The loop is restored, but not perfectly. A flaw has been introduced into the system. An error has been written into the code. A trace of the intrusion remains, an indelible stain on the fabric of his eternity. The wooden bird is still there, on his chart. It is a small, dark, and undeniable island of reality in a vast, shifting sea of illusion. The curse cannot unmake it, for it is not of its world. And so it does the next best thing. It incorporates it. It domesticates the miracle. The cartographer's hand, now guided once more by the restored, inexorable, and cruel logic of his curse, begins to draw the bird. But he does not draw it as an object resting on his map. He draws its coastline. He meticulously, beautifully, and perfectly maps its small, carved contours, its tiny, smooth wings, its elegantly shaped head. He treats it as he would any other island that has appeared in his shifting, chaotic world. He is mapping the memory. He is turning the profound, world-shattering intrusion into just another piece of his endless, unsolvable, and now subtly altered puzzle. From this moment on, for the rest of eternity, the ghost of a small wooden bird will forever be a part of the phantom geography of the Siren's Lament. On the quarterdeck, Captain Elias Thorne feels the ship, his world, his very consciousness settle back into its familiar, silent rhythm. The jarring, inexplicable stutter in the curse is over. The universe is stable again. He does not understand what happened. He will never understand what happened. His rational mind immediately, and as a matter of self-preservation, begins to construct a dozen possible, logical, and ultimately incorrect explanations. A momentary, freakish shift in the ship's spectral ballast, perhaps. a temporary and insignificant anomaly in the quality of the sourceless light. A trick of his own weary eyes, a momentary hallucination brought on by a century of unceasing, intense concentration. He categorizes the event, files it away under unexplained but trivial phenomena, and dismisses it. He must. To dwell on it would be to invite madness, to question the very foundations of his rational, scientific, and damned mind. He returns his full, obsessive, and undivided attention to his own eternal, intellectual torment. But something has changed. A seed of pure, unadulterated reality has been planted in the sterile soil of their damnation. And its roots, however subtle, are spreading. For the briefest of moments, the entire crew of the Siren's Lament felt the ripple of that small, solid wooden bird. The effect was different for each of them, a bespoke disruption tailored to their own private loop. The lookout, Marcus, high in his lonely perch, for a fraction of a second, thought he heard a sound. Not the imagined cry of a phantom gull, but the real, living, and heart-stoppingly familiar sound of a wood thrush, a bird he used to listen to in the forests behind his childhood home. The sound was so real it made him almost lower his spyglass, almost turn his head toward a memory of land. The sailors, John and Eric, in the middle of retrieving their sounding lines, felt a momentary, phantom, but undeniable resistance on the ropes, as if their spectral lead weights had brushed against a solid, unseen, and impossibly real object in the bottomless abyss. For a single, bewildering instant, they both thought the same thought. We have found the bottom. The cook, Ben, standing before his cold, silent stove, thought he smelled something. Not the ghost of food he was eternally preparing, but the sharp, clean, and deeply nostalgic scent of fresh sawn pine, a scent that transported him for a half-second back to his father's carpentry workshop. These moments were fleeting, infinitesimal cracks in the polished, seamless surface of their damnation. They were instantly dismissed by the powerful, overriding, and self-correcting logic of their curse. The memories were reburied, the sensations reclassified as tricks of the mind. The loop, for each of them, was restored. But the cracks, though papered over, remain. They now exist within the eternal repeating program, tiny, almost imperceptible inconsistencies, small, recurring, and unanswered questions that will surface and be suppressed over and over and over again for the rest of eternity. Finn, in his small boat, in his world of the living, could not possibly have known the profound and terrible thing he had done. In his desperate, empathetic, and profoundly human act of connection, he had not broken the curse. He had, in a way, made it more perfect. He had refined it. He had introduced a new, permanent, and intractable variable into their perfect, closed system of despair. He had replaced their pure, featureless, and almost peaceful suffering with a suffering that was now, and forever will be, haunted by the ghost of a real memory, by the ghost of a small, solid, and impossibly real wooden bird. He had not brought them hope. He had given their hopelessness a name, a shape, a texture. And for the damned, for the men who had almost achieved the perfect, thoughtless peace of oblivion, that is a far, far crueler fate. The ship moves. But now it moves with a secret. It carries a small, wooden and eternal wound. The ghost ship passed, and with it, the profound, unnatural silence that was its atmosphere. The world, Finn's world, slowly began to reassert itself. The first sound to return was the gentle, almost apologetic lapping of the grey water against the hull of his small boat. Then came the faint, rhythmic dripping of condensation from the sail onto the deck. And finally, the low, almost imperceptible sigh of a nascent wind, the first breath of a world reawakening. The fog, its purpose served, its spectral guest having departed, began to thin, its thick, oppressive blanket unraveling into long, delicate, and retreating tendrils of mist. Finn remained motionless in his small boat for a long time, a solitary figure in a vast, grey, and empty cathedral of sea and sky. He was not cold, he was not afraid, he was in a state of shock, a deep, resonant calm that follows a profound, world-altering event. His body trembled with the aftershocks of what he had witnessed, of what he had done. He had thrown a stone from the world of the living into the still, placid, and eternal lake of the damned. He had created a ripple. The memory of the cartographer's face, of his pale, ghostly features turning toward him, of the flicker of pure human confusion in his ancient, sorrowful eyes, was burned into Finn's mind, a single, perfect, and unforgettable image. He did not know if his act had been one of profound kindness or of unimaginable cruelty. Had he given a lost soul a moment of connection, a reminder that he was not forgotten, or had he simply tormented him with a memory of a world he could never, ever reclaim? He did not know. He understood with a sudden, weary clarity that the answer to that question was beyond the comprehension of a living mind. He had meddled with the mechanics of a sorrow so vast and so ancient it was a force of nature in its own right. He could only hope that his intention, his simple, desperate, and empathetic gesture of connection, was enough. As the wind freshened and the last of the fog dissolved, revealing a pale, clean, and empty horizon, Finn knew his quest was over. He had not set out to save them, or to join them, or to fight them. He had set out with a boy's obsessive and romantic curiosity to understand. And now he did. Not in a way he could ever explain to another living soul, but in a deep, quiet, and bone-weary way he understood. He understood the perfect poetic cruelty of their damnation. He understood the eternal, silent dignity of their pointless labor, and he understood that their fate was a closed loop, a story that was finished, and that his own story must now diverge from theirs. He had touched the ghost ship, and he had survived. Now he had to learn how to live with the memory of that touch. With slow, deliberate, and newly purposeful movements, he raised his small, patched sail. It caught the wind, and his small boat, which had been adrift and waiting, began to move with a new sense of direction. He did not consult his strange, mystical charts. He did not look to the stars. He simply turned his boat south, away from the cold, empty, and haunted waters of the far north, and began the long, slow journey back toward the world of men. The voyage home was different from the voyage out. The sense of obsessive, forward-driving purpose was gone, replaced by a deep, quiet, and contemplative melancholy. He was no longer a seeker. He was now a keeper of a profound and terrible secret. He had looked behind the curtain of the world, and he could never again fully believe in the simple reality of the stage. The world, which had once seemed so solid and real, now felt thin and fragile to him, a beautiful, sunlit illusion floating on a deep, dark, and sorrowful sea of what was possible. He sailed for weeks, his journey marked by the slow, steady return of life. First came the great, soaring seabirds, their calls a welcome, raucous sound after the profound silence of the north. Then came the sleek, dark shapes of seals, their curious, dog-like faces watching him from the water. And finally, one misty morning, he smelled it on the wind, the scent of land, the rich, complex, and overwhelmingly beautiful smell of damp earth, of green, growing things, of wood smoke. He made landfall not at Whitefall, but at a small, unfamiliar fishing village on a rocky, windswept coast. He sailed his small, battered boat into the harbour, his journey over. As he stepped onto the solid stone of the quay, his legs, so accustomed to the constant motion of the sea, felt unsteady, as if the land itself were swaying beneath him. Finn did not stay a sailor. He sold his small boat to a local fisherman for a handful of coins. The sea was no longer a place of mystery and adventure for him. It was a place of sorrow, a vast, grey tomb, and he no longer felt the desire to travel upon its surface. He had seen its deepest secret, and that was enough. He became a wanderer, but a wanderer of the land. For the rest of his life, he walked. He walked the coastal paths, the lonely inland roads, the winding tracks through the ancient forests. He never stayed in one place for long. He worked odd jobs, his hands skilled and his presence quiet, and then he would move on. always carrying his small bundle, which still contained the clothes he had left the sea serpent with, and his precious, secret collection of maps. He became a storyteller. In the evenings, in the quiet, fire-lit corners of roadside inns and taverns, he would sometimes unroll his strange, beautiful, and haunting charts. He would not speak of his own journey. He would not speak of the boy who had thrown a wooden bird through the window of a ghost ship. He would simply tell the story, the legend of the Siren's Lament, as Master Kalen had once told it to him. But his telling was different. The other sailors told the story as a frightening tale of doom, a warning to be heeded. Finn told it as a tragedy. His voice, a quiet, gentle baritone, would fill the room with a sense of profound, quiet sorrow. He would speak of Captain Thorn not as a villain, but as a brilliant, flawed man whose ambition had outstripped his wisdom. He would speak of the crew not as terrifying spectres, but as men, good and diligent men, trapped in an eternal, pointless duty. He spoke of their fate with such a deep, resonant and personal empathy that those who listened would feel not fear, but a deep and abiding pity. He taught them to see the sorrow, not just the spectre. He never married. He never had children of his own. His life was a solitary one, a life of quiet observation and gentle storytelling. He had one love, one obsession, and it was the memory of the silent, pale ship. He was, in his own way, as dedicated to her as her own crew was. They were damned to sail upon her, and he was damned to tell her story. He was her living memory, her connection to the world of men, her final, lonely, land-bound crewman. Many years later, Finn, now an old man, his face a roadmap of his own long, wandering journey, his hair as white as the sails of the ghost ship, found himself back in the port of Whitefall. The town had changed little. The same stone houses clung to the hills, the same misty drizzle fell from the sky. He walked through the familiar streets, a ghost from his own past, and made his way to the small town square. And there, sitting on the same stone bench by the rain-filled fountain, was a woman. She was old, her hair as white as his own, her face etched with the fine, delicate lines of a long life of quiet waiting. It was Elara. He sat down beside her, not on the bench, but on the low stone wall of the fountain. She looked at him, her stormy grey eyes, though faded with age, still holding the same deep, searching light. She did not recognize the old, weathered man, but she saw something in his eyes, a shared, ancient sorrow, a familiarity that transcended memory. Finn did not speak for a long time. He simply reached into the worn leather pouch that he always carried, and he took out his most precious possession. It was not one of his own maps. It was a single, small, and impossibly detailed drawing on a piece of aged, yellowed parchment. It was a drawing of a small, carved wooden bird. He handed it to her. Elara took the small, fragile drawing, her old, gnarled hands trembling slightly. She looked at the bird, at the exquisite, loving detail of its carved feathers, at the impossible, heartbreaking artistry of its form. And then she looked at the bottom of the parchment, where a single, faint, and almost illegible word was written, a word that looked as if it had been scratched by a hand that had almost forgotten how to write. The word was Elara. A single tear, a tear that had been waiting for a lifetime, welled up in her eye and fell onto the parchment, blurring the ink, but not the memory. She looked up at the old man, at Finn, and in her eyes he saw not sorrow, not grief, but a profound, quiet, and deeply peaceful understanding. She finally knew. Her father was lost, yes, but he had not been forgotten. A message, against all hope, against all logic, against all laws of the sea and of time, had finally, after a lifetime of waiting, been delivered. Finn, his last duty done, his last story told, nodded once to her, a gesture of shared, silent comprehension. He then rose and walked away, his solitary figure slowly disappearing into the familiar, comforting, and eternal grey mist of the coast. His journey was over. He had navigated the treacherous waters between the living and the damned, and he had, in his own quiet way, delivered a message from one world to the other. He had found his own peace, not in a safe harbour, but in the heart of the sea's greatest and most sorrowful mystery. And the ship? The ship moves. It will always move. But something within its eternal, unchanging rhythm is different. There is a new element in the silent, intricate dance of its damnation. In the great cabin, Thomas the cartographer still stands at his table. He still maps the shifting, illusory coastlines of his phantom sea, but now his map is never empty. In its very center is a small, constant and unchanging island, an island in the shape of a small carved wooden bird. His hand, as it traces the chaotic lines of the coast, will always, eventually, return to this island. His quill will trace its familiar, solid contours with a touch that is almost, but not quite, a caress. He does not know why. He does not remember the moment of its arrival. He only knows that this island is the one true fixed point in his entire, fluid universe. It is his anchor, it is his home, it is his sorrow. And Captain Elias Thorne, standing on his quarterdeck, still wrestles with his impossible calculations. But now, a new, unsolvable variable has been introduced into his eternal equation. A sound, a memory of a sound, a soft, solid thud that has no logical origin. It is a piece of data that does not fit. It is a ghost in his machine of reason. It will torment him, intrigue him, and elude him for the rest of eternity. It is a small, perfect, and permanent flaw in his perfect intellectual hell. The ship glides on, a pale, silent spectre in the eternal fog. It is still a warning, it is still a tragedy, but now it is also something more. It is a vessel that carries a secret. It is a prison that now holds a single, tiny, and impossibly real artifact from the world of the living. It is a story that was once only about damnation, but is now also, in its own quiet, heartbreaking way, a story about a connection that was made, a message that was, against all odds, delivered. It is a testament to a boy who dared to sail into the heart of a legend, and a father who, for the briefest of moments, remembered his daughter's name. The sorrow is still infinite, but it is no longer completely alone.